Thank you for tuning into the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. It is currently 3:24 p.m. And of course, today's date is the 27th of April 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. We are back, yo. All right. It is still the same situation with Vladimir Putin and Vladimir Zelensky, and of course, the 45th and the 47th President of the United States, President Trump. He is trying to find a common ground between Russia and Ukraine. Hopefully, he could find common ground where this peace deal can come to fruition. But as we all know, we understood that Zelensky and Trump met in Rome before the Pope's funeral. And in that spirit of togetherness and peace, and just coming together because of the death of the Pope, I I think for a fact that, well, no, not for a fact, but I hopefully think that would sort of reflect on this issue between Russia and Ukraine. Hopefully it does, but if it doesn't, who knows? But I am rooting for Trump, and I want him to find some sort of common ground here so people can stop dying. But with that being said, let's listen to what CNN has to say concerning this issue.
Russia's war on Ukraine. President Trump questions now whether Vladimir Putin really wants a peace deal. In a post on Truth Social, he questioned whether he's being strung along by the Russian president. Trump wrote, here's part of it, "It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along." Well, this follows Trump's 15-minute meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just before the funeral of Pope Francis. CNN senior White House reporter Kevin Liptak has more for us. Kevin, good morning to you.
Good morning, Victor. You know, those photos inside St. Peter's Basilica were so notable. These two men, President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, sitting knee to knee, deep in conversation about the conflict in Ukraine. But I think it was what the president wrote on Truth Social as he left Rome on Air Force One heading here to New Jersey that was so notable. The president offering a stern rebuke, not of Zelensky, who has been the subject of so much of his ire, but of Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, referencing specifically Russia's assault on Kyiv over the last week. It was the worst bombardment of the Ukrainian capital since last summer. And the president wrote, "There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions." So you hear there a real shift in the president's tone. You know, it was only on Thursday when I asked the president inside the cabinet room at the White House whether he thought Putin was serious about reaching a peace deal after this assault on Kyiv. And the president was pretty adamant. He thought both sides of this conflict did want to strike an agreement, did want to reach a peace. Now the president is voicing a lot more concern about whether Putin could be serious about this. He's essentially lending voice to the concerns that a lot of European leaders have had over the last several months, that Putin may be playing for time, that he thinks he has the upper hand and thinks that he can string President Trump out as he tries to resolve this conflict. And so clearly the president is frustrated that his attempts to bring this war to an end have so far not been fruitful. Remember, he said he would be able to resolve this conflict within 24 hours of taking office. Now he's butting up on the 100-day mark of his presidency, and so far there is no peace. Most of his ire has been directed at Zelensky over the course of the last several months. He has called him, he has said that he's not a fan of the Ukrainian president. There was that blow up in the Oval Office. But now it appears that the president is placing at least some of the blame on Putin, and that's a notable shift and certainly something to keep an eye on as this war continues to grind forward. Victor?
All right, Kevin, thank you very much. You set the table. Let's now have the conversation with Kim Dozier, CNN Global Affairs Analyst. Kim, good morning to you. So let's start here. You're encouraged by the characterization from both leaders about that conversation at the Basilica, the imagery, the social media postings. Why?
Well, this was the reset that Ukraine and especially Zelensky really needed after that Oval Office meeting, but also a one-on-one with President Trump allowed Zelensky to rebuild the relationship that had been broken by years of Trump seeing Zelensky as the one who refused to investigate Hunter Biden in his first term. Zelensky being portrayed over and over in conservative media as ungrateful and even associated with some of the hardline military units that have been called Nazis inside Ukraine. Instead, what we got to see was the two men having this obvious heart-to-heart. Meanwhile, the opening was created by Putin and Russia. Every time this past week that Trump has asked Vladimir Putin to stop the attacks, instead, we've had another night, just like last night, of hundreds of drones and missiles hitting various cities in Ukraine and killing people. And that seems to have really gotten Trump's attention. Hey, this guy isn't listening to me.
All right, so let's talk about the path forward here, because although they both said that pictures look like they're having an intense conversation, only lasted 15 minutes, but you can get something done in 15 minutes. The President Trump, told Time magazine that Crimea will stay with Russia. The president speaks about Russia tapping him along as if that's some revelation. Starmer, Macron, they've been saying that for months now. So are they really any closer to a deal?
Yeah, here's where we get to the hard part. The two proposals, the one put forward by Ukraine and Europe and the one put forward by the US, which feels like it was dictated by Vladimir Putin, are very far apart. The current US deal would basically allow Russia to keep everything it's holding, Crimea, but also the current territory that it's occupying, and have very few security guarantees. Ukraine wants reassurances. They want NATO troops on the ground, but individually represented, not under the banner of NATO, to make sure that Russia can't invade again. And the White House hasn't fully embraced that yet. So will this moment of goodwill lead to any changes in those proposals? I did speak to one Ukrainian official earlier this week who was briefed on the talks, and they said, look, it doesn't look good, but this is what happens in negotiations. You bring the two impossible wish lists together, and then you start bargaining. Before this, we didn't even have anything written down from the U.S. administration. Now we have something to work from. And I think you also might see a signing of a mineral deal as soon as this week to keep that momentum going and to keep Trump thinking, hey, Ukraine is actually working with us. It's Moscow that's working against us.
Yeah, also coming this week, the 100-day mark, and that marker might also offer some urgency to get something accomplished that you can say you did within the first 100 days. The potential for sanctions mentioned in the president's social media post, the banking or secondary sanctions, what's the potency of those, considering the sanctions that were levied by the U.S., Western Europe, during the first year and a half of this war? They weren't deterrents.
They still didn't go after the oil as much as they could, Russia's oil sales. They allowed Europe, India, China to keep buying oil and natural gas from Russia. So I have spoken to Trump administration officials, current and former, who say they can think of ways to tighten up to make Vladimir Putin feel more economic pain. Let's see, though, if that's just a tweet or that more bad behavior leads to an actual levying of new sanctions, which would at least be a symbolic hit against Putin and might make him sit up and take notice.
Kimberly Dozier, always good to start with you on a Sunday morning. Thanks so much.
Of course, now it's like, wait, Putin, what are you doing, Putin? You're bombing Ukraine. Like, what is wrong with you? But I guess Trump is now, I guess, realizing that Putin is not forthcoming. He's not forthcoming. And Zelensky better sign the rare earth deal quick.
With more in this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is National Security Advisor Michael Waltz. Michael, it's good to have you this morning. Welcome.
Thanks, Maria. Good to be with you.
Well, we've got a lot to get to. Let's first start with that meeting at the Vatican. What progress was done between President Trump and President Zelensky at the Vatican?
Well, Maria, let's just take a breath here and take a step back. How iconic that setting, that scene, that meeting is going to go down in the history books for President Trump to be a president of peace, to be talking peace and diplomacy in the Vatican, of all places, just before we were able to walk out and the president sat with world leaders, people of all faiths, hundreds of thousands in the crowd. And the thing he was determined to do was to talk to Zelensky face to face and talk about how we're going to get the largest land war in Europe to an end. Both sides have to want that. He's expressed his frustration with both sides, but yet his determination. And if you go back to, we're 100 days in, Maria, just 100 days ago, Biden and his team had no end in sight. This was an endless war. This was a meat grinder of men and material and national treasure that really he had never defined victory. And President Trump is determined to use diplomacy to bring this war to an end, to talk to both sides. And just in 100 days, we've had multiple rounds led by Secretary of State Rubio, by Ambassador Steve Witkoff in Saudi Arabia, and now in the Vatican. And it was just truly special to stand there with other world leaders looking on as the President Trump led the way.
Yes, another iconic shot and another iconic meeting for sure that President Trump led. Do you believe that Zelensky understands he's likely not going to get more land back?
Well, there's been a number of discussions of territory, of what they need to make sure that this war never continues, that it is permanent. We've talked to our European partners, who you saw the images of both Starmer from the United Kingdom and Macron from France, that Europe has to step up. I know that you have Ambassador Whitaker, our new NATO ambassador, who's fantastic, coming on talking about how the Europeans need to take the lead in the future. Yeah. All of those things are key parts of the discussion with both Zelensky and with Putin. And next is to drive both sides of the table, but they both have to want it. And the president has expressed his frustrations in whether both sides genuinely want to end this war, but he is determined to have the United States of America and him. I'll just say this. The current leader of NATO, who was here this week, said only President Trump could break the deadlock that we saw 100 days ago under the Biden administration, and he's done just that, starting with his call with both Putin and Zelensky just a few months ago.
And, of course, President Trump tweeted or posted this as well. He writes in a post yesterday, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he does not want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently. How will the president deal with Putin differently?
Well, you saw also in that truth, Maria, that he talked about potential action on banking, potential action on the oil and gas sector. Okay. But he's determined to use both carrots and sticks to get both sides to the table, indirect talks, talking about those items that we discussed to drive this to a permanent end with European-led security architecture.
Let me move on because we've got a lot to cover, and I do want to get your take. You just talked about the possibility of using banking against Russia. I want to get your take on what you're willing to do regarding China. The United States obviously has taken a tough stance against communist China, and the latest provocation is China has seized the disputed reef in the South China Sea. That's on top of the propaganda, on top of the surveillance, on top of the undermining from communist China. Will you pull any financial or economic levers, including yanking stocks from U.S. exchanges that are Chinese companies that are tied to the Chinese military?
Well, Maria, I'm not going to get ahead of our amazing economic team led by Secretary Bessent, Ambassador Greer, Lutnick, and others. But look, here's what the president's determined to do, and I'm looking at this from a national security standpoint. We have to bring our supply chains home. We saw even cheap items like mask, gowns, and gloves, if they're made abroad and not made here, become a national security issue. We have to have clean supply chains for our military equipment. Everything from manufacturing to shipbuilding, which he just had a fantastic executive order on, to critical minerals, as you mentioned, to chips, AI, quantum. If we can't have them here in the United States, which is absolutely the preference, we have to have access through our allies or even right here in our Western Hemisphere. That is a key element. Rebuilding our military under Pete Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth, focused on meritocracy and lethality, is a key element. And then, of course, working with our allies, and it's no accident that President Trump had Prime Minister Modi of India, had Prime Minister Ishiba of Japan, and made calls to the Prime Minister of Australia and South Korea. Yeah. All of those pieces are key elements of our competition with China that President Trump knows. We have to win through our markets, and we have to win through our strong economy.
Is the Ukraine
and that's
deal
how you avoid any conflict.
Is the Ukraine rare earth minerals deal going to get done?
Oh, the Ukraine deal is going to get done. The negotiators were working hard over the weekend. That is first and foremost on both Secretary Bessent and the president's mind. It's going to get done, Maria. President's determined to make it so.
Mike, let me just ask you about Pete Hegseth and the Defense Department. Can you do this in what appears to be a chaotic, weakened Defense Department? Pete Hegseth, of course, our Defense Secretary, has been threatening polygraph tests. He's been firing people who we thought were his allies. What is the state of affairs at the Defense Department right now?
Maria, I introduced Secretary Hegseth at his hearing. I've known him for years. You know what? Let me tell you about the soldiers, sailors, Marines that every day come up to me, come up to him. We just had wounded warriors in the office with the president that say, thank God for Secretary Hegseth. Thank God for President Trump as commander-in-chief. Just 100 days ago, we were more worried about DEI and climate change nonsense. Now we're focused on lethality and winning. That's been, in just over 3 months, the change. And what we owe is the best equipment that is on time, on budget, and lethal to those soldiers and sailors. I'll tell you, a Pentagon that was chaotic was one that had a defense secretary that disappeared for 2 weeks just last year, and nobody knew about it. Pete is leading from the front. He is leading the charge, and he has no tolerance for leaking.
How's he going to replace all those people so fast?
This is a media narrative that we are going to power through. What's that?
How's he going to replace all of those people so fast?
Maria, there's 20,000 people in the Pentagon. There is a record amount of generals. And the other piece there is accountability. We have had several general officers that weren't getting the job done and admirals get fired and get replaced, including our great new chairman, Raisin Kane, who I just talked to last night. That's what that Pentagon needs. No one ever gets fired. There's never a sense of accountability. Now there is, and whether it's leaks or not getting the job done or failures in terms of procurement, acquisition, now you have a leader that's in charge, and I couldn't be prouder of Pete Hegseth.
I know that you have talked about China being the long-term threat, but short-term, it's Iran, isn't it?
Well, let's look at what the president has said. He has been crystal clear. No nukes. and he prefers a deal, and he prefers a Middle East that we saw in his first term getting back to the Abraham Accord. So borders secure, getting the Middle East back to peace, ending the largest land war in Europe, and competing with China in a very strong and tough way.
Absolutely.
That's what we're seeing in the first 100 days. All of that getting done, and it's been an honor to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, we know that last month 3 people tried to cross the border versus 4,000 a year ago. We
99% reduction.
Yeah, exactly. We know that is the president's
and taking on the cartels and
success
kicking
in the first 100 days. It's great to see you this morning, sir. Thank you. National Security.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. There you have it. There you have it. Mike Waltz defends Pete Hegseth and the Trump administration. What do you guys think about Pete Hegseth, though? What do you guys think about Pete Hegseth? With Pete Hegseth, with the whole leaks coming out of the Pentagon, what is going on with Signal app? What's going on with the Signal app, ladies and gentlemen? All right, here we go. More on China and the United States.
You've got over 80 countries now, and China being one of them, that are in talks, that are ready to make a deal.
We need to call their hand and slap them to Pluto until they start abiding by fair trading rules. China will ultimately have no choice.
China has been waging a trade war against the United States for decades. Donald Trump is simply trying to fight back on behalf of Americans.
The views from several Republican senators there. New signs that China might be caving in to President Trump's trade war. Beijing is now pulling back its 125% tariffs on some U.S. goods. This as President Trump claims he's spoken with Chinese President Xi many times. China denies it has had any talks with the White House. Let's bring in Gordon Chang. He is a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, first of all, why would China say that they haven't had any talks with the United States if, in fact, President Trump is telling the truth?
I think it's because Xi Jinping has staked his legitimacy on having surpassed the U.S. And so it's very difficult for him to then say, oh, we're bowing to pressure from President Trump and we're going to talk about tariffs and other things. So I think he's boxed himself in. But in general, since he's become China's ruler in late 2012, he has made the political system hostile, where only the most belligerent answers are considered to be acceptable. So he's a very, very thin line which he can walk right now.
Well, President Trump may or may not have to answer the voters in 4 years. I mean, he's thrown out this balloon about running again, but most people, I think, believe he's already a lame duck president. He has to, though, keep members of Congress happy, at the very least. Xi doesn't have to do that, does he? I mean, he is an iron-fisted leader in China. So doesn't he have the ability to be, I don't know, more aggressive than President Trump?
I think that he once did when he was accumulating power from everybody else. But right now, he has near total accountability for what's gone wrong in China. And also, there is a lot of infighting at the top of the Communist Party, especially in the Chinese military, where it seems that his adversaries have now got the upper hand. But also, there's civilian infighting as well. And, yes, Donald Trump has all sorts of election deadlines, like 2 years from now in the midterms. But Xi Jinping has an election every day. And because there are no rules in that system, he can lose power at any day. So I suspect that every morning that he wakes up and he feels his fingers and his toes, I think he's pretty happy.
So China is making allowances for some U.S. products to be imported without tariffs, right? Does that suggest that they are finding that it's not so easy to block U.S. products?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's not just that they're reducing tariffs. For instance, President Trump reduced tariffs on electronic goods coming in from China. What China has done, which we learned from both the Reuters and the Financial Times reporting yesterday, is that there are no tariffs on certain categories of U.S. goods. So, for instance, aviation parts, semiconductors, medical devices, medicines, industrial chemicals, things that China can't get elsewhere. And they're just coming into China tariff-free.
But the Chinese official statistics are that their economy grew 5.5% in the first quarter of this year. It suggests that things are pretty rosy there.
Yeah, 5.4%. But when we're seeing underlying indicators, John, so for instance, price information from February and December, it shows that China is in a deflationary spiral. That's inconsistent with any notion of robust growth. Also, an official Chinese statistics showed that tax receipts declined 5.3% in the first quarter. That is certainly inconsistent with any sort of sense of above 5% growth. So I think the Chinese economy is contracting. And if it's not contracting, John, it's going to be contracting soon because deflation always kills economic growth.
Well, isn't the danger that, if things get worse in China, and they've already got a real estate crisis, among other things, the things that you mentioned, if things get worse, isn't there a danger that they lash out at the outside world, maybe Taiwan, as a way of, relieving the pressure internally?
Oh, absolutely. And in the last 3 weeks, we've seen provocative Chinese military activity directed not only against Taiwan, but also South Korea, Japan, Philippines, and Australia. Just a couple days ago, we learned that the Chinese unfurled the flag at Sandy Key. That is territory of the Philippines. This is an aggressive act, and it shows that China is becoming much more dangerous externally while it's having its problems internally.
So what, if you were advising the White House, what would you tell the president to do when it comes to the tariff situation?
Well, I think that President Trump needs to show will and determination. So instead of talking about reducing tariffs, I think that we need to start actually imposing some more costs. So, for instance, China's not taking Boeing aircraft deliveries. We flew back 3 737 MAXs from China that were about to be delivered. Well, if I were President Trump, I would say to Boeing, you can no longer provide services or parts to Chinese airlines because that will ground the Chinese fleet. And I think that will bring the Chinese to heel fairly quickly. But we need to do some things that would be considered unthinkable. This is not the type of normal trade war that people are used to. This is looking like an all-encompassing struggle.
So you advocate tough measures?
Yeah, and when President Trump last week signaled conciliatory moves, the Chinese even got worse. And they were saying, well, no talks until the U.S. removes all tariffs. So our attempts at conciliation were just met with more belligerence on the part of the Chinese. So that can't be good. And that shows that tactic, although it sounds like it should work, is probably not working.
Gordon Chang, keeping an eye on China for us. Gordon.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. Thank you so much. Shout out to Luke. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you so much. All right. What do you guys think is going to happen here between China and the United States? China has to cave because the United States is the largest consumer on earth. And of course, as of today, China is the largest manufacturer. China is the largest manufacturer for sure. However, if you are the largest manufacturer and your consumer, who happens to be the largest consumer, is saying, you know what, you have to treat us fairly. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking to be treated fairly when it comes to trade. And every American is supposed to be on the same page. Of course, the tariff is what a lot of people are complaining about, but we do need fair trade. I mean, nobody's going to say they do not know that China has been screwing the United States for a long time. Everybody knows, Democrats and Republicans. So Trump happens to be the only one with balls to get this done. All right, so I'm around this right here. Mark Levin for sure. Another legend. Another truth seeker. Right here.
It's in the Fifth Amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment. It's in the 14th Amendment to apply the Fifth Amendment to the states. Due process. We all believe in due process, don't we? What does that mean? Where does it come from? When did it start? You've got a lot of talking heads, some of whom are lawyers, most of whom are not, who keep telling you that illegal aliens, particularly criminals, particularly MS-13 wife-beater types, have a right to due process. It's amazing. One judge says so. Another judge says that 530,000 illegal aliens who were illegally brought here in violation of our parole rules by Joe Biden with an executive order, each and every one of them has a right to due process. Where does that come from? What happens if somebody steps over our border or puts their toe in our water? Do they have a right to due process too? Gets a little more complicated, doesn't it? But notice all the commentators and all the experts don't explain it. Where does due process begin? Where does it end? How does it apply? You know why they don't explain it? Because they don't know. And you know why they don't know? Because the Supreme Court is all over the map. And you know why the Supreme Court's all over the map? Because the truth is, it is setting policy. No, Mark, you don't understand. It's interpreting the Constitution. I understand the Constitution. I understand the men who wrote it, and I understand the men who ratified it. The Bill of Rights came after. It came in the first Congress. It was adopted by supermajorities in both houses, 12 of them, sent to the states, ratified by a super-duper majority of 3/4 of the state legislatures, and they reduced it to 10. That's our Bill of Rights. But where does the Constitution state, or the Bill of Rights for that matter, that the Supreme Court decides what's due process? Well, Mark, somebody has to decide. Do you know what your framers of the Constitution said? You know what the ratifiers at the state convention said? They said, stay in your lane. It's a phrase I use all the time. So the executive will decide due process when it comes to executive decision makings. Congress can pass laws related to due process, but the court doesn't get to make policy when it comes to due process. But Marbury versus Madison, 1803. I didn't ask you about Marbury versus Madison or any Supreme Court ruling where the court has seized policymaking power for itself. The original Constitution, the original constitutional debates, the original state debates, what did they decide? They decided that the executive branch would run the executive branch. They decided that the Supreme Court and what other courts Congress create runs the courts, and Congress runs the Congress. The Supreme Court doesn't just have power to make decisions all the time, all over the map, anytime it wants. And so this is why we have a problem right now. Who's going to decide what due process means? The court? Is the court now a political Politburo? Now let's look at some of the things the U.S. Supreme Court have done on this issue of aliens and due process. First, we look at the Constitution. We look at the Fifth Amendment. And the relevant part, no person shall be held or be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And so what you're hearing day in and day out by some people who should know better, some people who don't know better, that means due process under the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment applies to illegal aliens. What kind of due process? What do you mean by that? Full civilian U.S. citizen due process? What does that mean? The left knows what it means. That's what the left wants. Not because they give a damn about any illegal immigrant. They use the illegal immigrants, and they've used them all along. No, it's because they're trying to change the country. Revolution by immigration. That's why they opened the border. The Supreme Court has suggested that the extent of due process for aliens present in the United States, and there are many sources for this, this is constitution.congress/gov, quote, may vary depending upon the alien status or circumstance. So, due process isn't chiseled into stone. It just depends. For instance, at times the court has indicated that at least some of the constitutional protections to which an alien is entitled may turn upon whether the alien has been admitted into the United States or develops substantial ties to our country. Thus, there's some uncertainty regarding the extent to which due process considerations constrain Congress's exercise of its immigration power with respect to aliens within the United States. Uh-oh. That sounds a little confusing. Well, we have a case, 2001 Supreme Court, Zagvias versus David. The court construed a statute authorizing detention of aliens with final orders of removal as having implicit temporal limitations. Wow, what does all that mean? There's certain limitations to it. According to the court, construing the statute in a manner that would allow the indefinite detention of lawfully admitted aliens who've been ordered removed would raise serious constitutional concerns. In the court's view, because aliens within the United States are protected by due process, Congress must give a clear indication of an intent to authorize the indefinite detention of removable aliens. Justice Antonin Scalia wrote a dissent in that case, as did Anthony Kennedy. But Scalia said, why? What do you mean they can't be kept indefinitely? Of course they can, unless Congress says otherwise. Why are we, the Supreme Court, making that determination, number one? And number two, it's just not our area, and it's Congress's area. Wow, he must have been a radical. In Denmore versus Kim, 2003, the Supreme Court held that the mandatory detention during the pendency of formal removal proceedings of certain aliens who had committed specific crimes was constitutionally permissible. Uh-oh, now I'm getting confused. So, the pendency of formal removal proceedings of certain aliens who had committed specific crimes was constitutionally permissible. So what's the deadline on that? Can they be kept indefinitely? Apparently so. Wow. Excuse me, it's confusing. In 2018, the Supreme Court in Jennings versus Rodriguez, they held that the statutes were textually clear in mandating or authorizing the detention of certain aliens during the removal proceedings, and that nothing in those provisions limited the length of detention or required periodic bond hearings. Whoa. They could be held forever? Apparently so. Having a due process. Then we have a 2020 decision, Department of Homeland Security versus, I'll give it a best shot, Thurisigium. That held that an alien detained shortly after entering the United States, he got into the United States about 25 feet, could not constitutionally challenge a federal statute limiting judicial review of his expedited removal. Congress has passed a law and said, you know what, Congress, you know what, Supreme Court, you stay out of this. You stay out of this. We'll handle this. And so they said, look, this statute limiting judicial review of his expedited removal, they grabbed him and they threw him out. Those proceedings, a streamlined removal process applicable to aliens apprehended at or near the border. Although the alien had physically entered the United States, the court determined that he could be treated for due process purposes as if he stopped at the border, because he was encountered only 25 yards inside the United States and essentially remained on the threshold of entry. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the court going to do here? They're going to take 1,000 situations and have 1,000 different standards for due process? Or not? That's the problem when you have a court turning into a Politburo, into a super legislature, or into the executive branch making all these decisions. All these are 9 lawyers, 3 of whom are radical left-wing kooks, 2 of whom aren't sure what they are, and the others who are pretty solid, especially Alito and Thomas. So why are they making all these decisions? Do they have a better idea, more wisdom, more judgment on making these decisions? Of course not. But here we are. The Supreme Court's jurisprudence indicates that although aliens present within the United States generally have due process protections, the extent of those constitutional protections may depend on certain factors, including whether the alien has been lawfully admitted or developed ties to the United States, whether the alien has engaged in specified criminal activity, how long they've been in the United States, and a long list of other things. Therefore, even with regard to aliens present within the United States, the court has sometimes deferred to Congress's policy judgments that limit the ability of some classes of aliens to contest their detention or removal. Does that clear things up for you, Mr. Producer? It shouldn't. The Supreme Court has not ruled on, 1, due process relating to the mass importation of aliens under Biden. Flew them in here, 530,000 of them, by executive order, and what rights, if any, applied to each and every one of those 530,000. A federal district judge has decided they get full due process rights. Do you know what that means effectively? That means amnesty. So Biden breaks the law, the parole law under immigration laws, uses executive order, literally solicits and brings in over 500,000 aliens, illegal aliens, gives them a 2-year right to be in the United States. President Trump comes in and says, nah, you're out of here. In the court, no. Due process. Who says? The judge. Based on what? If due process rights do apply to those 530,000, I'll go further. If due process applies to the 21 million illegal aliens, what exactly are we talking about? What kind of due process? 1,000 different types of due process? Depending if somebody's standing on their head or doing 12 push-ups? What is it? And how will this be administered, America? We have a backlog of 1.5 million cases already in front of these administrative law immigration judges. The vast majority of illegal aliens don't show up. And so there's an order that they're to be deported. Okay, so what? We can't find them. Where are they? We don't have enough personnel for that. Isn't that the point? Isn't that the point of what Biden and the Democrats have done and what the media want to do? They've collapsed the system. Now they wave around the Constitution, due process, because they know the impossibility of applying full due process to everybody. Well, what about partial due process? Well, partial due process, is that due process? What about those who lie in their applications to get into the United States? Like on student visas. What about them? Oh, no, they have free speech rights. They're like Rosa Parks, you know. Just because they want the annihilation of the Jews, just because they like support violent, riotous activity on campuses, just because they are a front for Hamas and other terrorist groups, doesn't mean they don't have a right to free speech, you know. What about those people who come here who are violent? International gang members. You know, like the ones that were sent back or sent to El Salvador. What are their due process rights? Do you know the ACLU or some group wanted to treat them as a class action, you know. And they need to be given notice. You see, this is what happens when eggheads in robes take over. You're going to give hundreds of international terrorist gangbangers from Venezuela sent here by that government notice? Oh, yes. And when you give them notice, what will they do? Goodbye. They'll disappear into the population. This is anarchy that they're proposing. This isn't about due process. It's not about due process at all. What about those who are advocates of terrorism, as I said? Well, we already know what the Democrats think, don't they? They visit them and they want to make sure they're taken care of. They live in these hellish conditions, you know. That's what the squad is telling us, and so forth and so on. The Democrat Party, as I wrote my book, hates this country. This is revolution by immigration. That's what it is. Tens of millions of people coming into this country who cannot possibly assimilate it into the country. And they don't want them assimilated into the country. You go through our public schools today, they don't teach Americanism, the Pledge of Allegiance, the grand founding fathers, and all the rest of it. You have to assimilate people into your culture, into your society. There's none of that going on. So the problem we now have is a president can change the entire nature of our citizenship, our civil society, our culture, as Biden did, by lawlessly defying immigration laws to the tune of tens of millions of illegal aliens entering the country in such numbers they cannot assimilate into the country, and the people who want the open borders don't even want them to assimilate into our country. As I said, it's revolution by immigration. And this includes thousands of aliens who seek the destruction, overthrow, and disruption of our country. You see it on our college campuses. They're sent here by their governments, or they come here and they participate. It includes criminals. It includes gang members. It includes spies. They're all supposed to get full due process. That's what the left is arguing. That's what these trial judges are arguing. That's what the media are arguing. The Supreme Court's still trying to figure out what to do as our policy Politburo, rather than put the hammer down on these judges. The Supreme Court has a mixed record right now of participating in this and not participating in this. It's almost like Sybil with 23 personalities, even though there's only 9 justices. So we have de facto massive amnesty. That's what's being attempted here. We're going to have birthright citizenship for those who are born here from the millions of people who are illegal aliens who were brought here. I have little confidence in this court to do the right thing on birthright citizenship. If they follow the Constitution, they will. And I pray they do. But there's one other thing nobody's talking about. Chain migration. Uh-oh is right. Tens of millions of illegal aliens. They have children. Ooh, you're a citizen. Citizen gets old enough, says, you know what? I want to bring my 27 relatives from Honduras, from Switzerland, from the Congo, from Syria. I want to bring them into the country too. Well, by all means. We're talking about 100 million, 150 million people into this country who are foreigners, who are not assimilating into our culture, and it will destroy the United States. It will destroy the United States. I'm not the only one to say this. Many liberals have said this. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., big leftist, the late professor, was an advisor to Kennedy, less so to Johnson, but nonetheless. And he wrote a book called This Uniting of America. And he talks about this sort of thing. Samuel Huntington, a great professor from Harvard at one point, he writes about this. I've written about this. This is exactly what's taking place. This is how you destroy America. And they seek to destroy America. There's no question about it. But I do have a question for all the hypocrites out there in the Democrat Party, in the media, and in their front groups. How come you didn't complain about Biden? What are you talking about? It just takes a little bit of research, ladies and gentlemen. The UCLA, that's not my school. That's a whack job university at this point. Their law school. Here we have from June 22nd, 2023. Last time I checked, Biden was president. Gross miscarriages of justice continue 2 years into Biden administration's fast-track court program for families seeking asylum. Oh, do tell. 2 years ago, the Biden administration launched the dedicated docket. And what happened? What happened was, ladies and gentlemen, 70% of those on the docket in Los Angeles didn't have attorneys. But they had due process. The court says they don't have to have attorneys. 72.4% of the deportation orders were issued in absentia, meaning the immigrant families never had their day in court. Almost 50% of absentia deportation orders were against children, 2/3 of whom were age 6 and under. Gee willikers, I don't remember hearing anything about due process, do you? No. I don't remember hearing a damn thing about it. The Biden administration says UCLA Law School has continued to double down on prioritizing expediency over fairness, fast-tracking families through removable proceedings without legal representation. They said he violated due process. So furious was the UCLA Law School, they issued another report, and this one was in December 2023. A damning new report released today by the Center for Immigration Law and Policy, UCLA Law, finds the Biden administration has failed children in immigration court under its watch. Despite taking important steps in early days, the report details how the administration's policies have led to grave injustices of children facing immigration court proceedings in the United States and resulted in tens of thousands of children ordered deported, most without legal representation. They said no due process. Where was the ACLU? Where was Norm Eisen? Where was Mark Elias? Where were all these frauds and phonies and fakes? Where were all these fantastic radical left-wing Democrat judges? 5- and 6-year-olds being deported, they didn't have lawyers? What kind of due process is this? Oh my goodness. For the first 100 years in this country, there was no such thing as due process with immigrants, let alone illegal immigrants. And so piece by piece, by piece by piece, the Supreme Court's making up the laws as it goes along, even though really originally it didn't have such authority. And it's all intended to change the country forever and to destroy President Trump's agenda. We need to
Shout out to Mark. You know, Mr. Levin for sure has a high knowledge of the Constitution. 100%. All right, moving forward.
It's a reminder of President Trump's promises. There were a lot of them as he took office. Where do they stand at the 100-day mark? My panel joins me now, and I do want to start with the economic numbers that we're seeing.
The first 100 days. Well, for sure, the border has been Trump's biggest win, 1,000%. The border, for sure. Now, the trade deals, he's still going back and forth with other countries. And this wars that he's been trying to end is still going on. So, for the most part, the first 100 days, the border, I would say, is the Trump's administration biggest win so far.
Our new poll out this morning, they're pretty brutal. 64% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of inflation. 65% disapprove of his handling of tariffs. 61% disapprove of his overall handling of the economy. On immigration, a majority of Americans, 53%, disapprove as well. You know, David Urban, I'm coming to you first.
Shocking. Shocking. Look, the numbers suck. Those are terrible numbers, right? We don't want to see those numbers. But again, snapshot in time. There's some other polling out that's from the Washington Post that says 55% of Americans view the president has done the right thing to address major problems in America. So you can, polls are what you want. You can see what you want to see in polls, but these numbers aren't great. I would say that I'm sure the Trump administration is looking at these. They're in it for the long. They're in this for the long run, and we've been through this. Look, how many times, Dan, have you and I and Karen and others sat here and said, "Trump's dead," and then he's like, "I'm not dead yet," and then he continues. Listen, he continues. I was here, after the Access Hollywood tape. I've been here through so many.
Yeah, but this is not that. This is about people's.
I get it, but the numbers will improve. I guarantee you. Over time, things are going to start happening.
Well, but I think there's two questions, David, and you know this. It's over how much time and how much more pain are people going to have to feel? Because here's the thing. When you have a headline from the Wall Street Journal that says, worst April since the Great Depression, and you have business leaders, Wall Street, small businesses, farmers saying, help, help, help. You're tanking our economy. This is too much chaos. This is too much pain. And let's be honest, he did campaign on tariffs, but he didn't say there'd be pain. And now people are living it and realizing, and by the way, this is before we even get to the budget and whatever cuts may end up in the final version of the budget and the impact that people will feel on that. So I think part of what you're seeing is people feel betrayed. They feel like you said you were going to deal with inflation and costs, and you have not done it.
I mean, I don't know if it's quite. I wish that it was that reflective. I really do think, though, we're in April, right? And we are so far from an election. Now, if we were 3 weeks out, I'd be saying this is a different story, but we're not. Remember, 3 months ago, where the economy was, and everybody was singing praises and excited. It will change so many times between now and next month or 2 months. So I don't think we're quite to that place where people are saying we feel betrayed. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for this administration to make changes. They will make many changes. The one thing I've observed is volatility is part of what they do. The real question to me, will this be lasting or not, is what does Congress do about it? Like you said, I do think there is proof in the pudding that, they're the heat shield. The congressional Republicans are the heat shield for what this administration is doing. And there's a lot of heat and there's a lot of friction. But the reality is what voters are really going to think about is what they actually pass into law.
Well, let's turn to the issue, or at least focus in on the issue of immigration, because this number, we mentioned it, but I just want to drill down on it once again. Trump's handling of immigration, 53% say they disapprove. And this is an area, Congresswoman, where, he says this is why he won. I don't know. I still think it was the economy. It's probably obviously a combination of both. Yasmin Ansari, I should say, welcome. And you were a part of the sort of delegation that went to El Salvador. So you definitely have immigration and what is going on with regard to the courts on your mind. What do you make of these numbers?
I think that it is the natural response to the overcorrection of this administration. They're taking it too far when it comes to their immigration policies. I think, Trump pledged mass deportations, which of course I am vehemently against. But now when you have a situation where the Supreme Court of the United States is making a ruling and the president is openly defying that, and we are really honing into this issue of due process, because I think at the core of it, Americans, whether you're a Republican, independent, Democrat, believe in fundamental rights we have as Americans, including due process. I think that's making a big difference. I represent Arizona, obviously a state that's on the front lines of this issue, and whether I speak with Democrats or more moderate Republicans, I think people are very concerned about this authoritarian nature of this administration.
Yeah, listen, I respectfully disagree. I think the Trump administration is doing quite well. They're doing what the American people want to see. I think that the snapshot cases, like you saw with the, well, you polls say what they want, but you saw the anecdotes are pretty powerful. This case with Judge Dugan, if those are the kind of fights Democrats are going to pick to fight, you're going to keep losing, right? I just think, listen, I do agree. Look, we don't want to sweep up and send people away who should not be sent away. I think we need to do it.
Children.
We need to do it well.
For this to be an issue that the president has always been polling well on, to now say the majority of Americans are.
Well, I think there's two issues there. Immigration and border security is what he won on. And I think he's doing what people want him to do. I think it's a huge mistake for congressional Democrats to make, Garcia their rallying cry. I was like, wait, what? It's going to be.
I disagree. I think defying the Supreme Court is a massive issue for Americans.
That's for the American people. But that's
yes,
Republicans.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not about. It's about the 3 American citizen children.
Yes.
One who has cancer. Hold on.
Wait, you took the part. You took the.
It's about the children who are American citizens who were deported. David and I've talked about this before. What we're seeing. In any administration makes mistakes. Since 2003, thousands of American citizens have been detained wrongfully, but because people are not getting due process,
that has to be fixed. Listen, I believe in that. But here's the thing. I think what's appropriate. Give me a sec. What's appropriate is for the senator representative who represents those people to engage wholeheartedly on the administration. I've done that. I have done that, and that's what they're doing. But my point is to have members of Congress making this their rallying cry. They are going to miss the message to the masses, and that's what they continue to do. And that's my frustration. I agree. Due process is a huge concern.
82%
and if that were my constituent, I would have gone to bat, and that's what should happen. But for it to be the message for the Democrats, they're going to miss it. They're going to miss the economy. They're going to admit that's where their sweet spot
I just think you can't ignore this issue. And even on this issue, if we're going to go back to polling, the vast majority of Americans believe that Trump should listen to the Supreme Court and return Kilmar Garcia.
We're going to have to sneak in a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're looking at live images of Democrats staging a sit-in of sorts on Capitol Hill this Sunday morning. They call for an urgent conversation with the American people. My panel is back. As we look at this and think about what we're going to see over the next 100 days, Congresswoman Ansari, is this the kind of thing that you think is working for the Democratic Party?
I think what I love that I'm seeing is you have Democrats from a variety of backgrounds doing what it is that they are good at. So from massive rallies that obviously AOC and Senator Sanders are hosting, to town halls in Republican districts that many of us are hosting, to Senator Booker on the Senate floor. I think we are demonstrating that outside of typical, business as usual actions like legislative priorities, we are fighting back in every way, shape, or form that we can, and I think you can expect more of that.
You used to represent a swing district, a moderate Republican. What do you want from the president?
I want him to address inflation and the cost of goods and services and health care. I want him to think about the things that I think about. How am I going to pay for this? What's going to happen for my family? And I think that's most of America. And to the Congressman's point, I just felt like that is my frustration, is that there is not a credible flag being raised on the other side. The people you just mentioned all come from places where it's not hard for them to win races, right? They don't have to meet the people in the middle. They're the ones who are rallying the base, and that didn't work in November. I don't know why they think it's going to work now. And I think Republicans have the same responsibility. You're going to see it within the more moderate wings of the Republican Party. They're the ones who are going to start, and I've even seen it in the last week, starting to push back. We don't like this. We're not going to legislate this way. And as the legislation flows, because everything Trump's talked about right now, it's all based on his EO, executive order accomplishments. The next Democrat administration, like that's a ripple in the pond. They'll be gone. What Congress does is what matters.
I think we have to remember that the Democratic Party is not just Washington. If you look at what's happening in the courts, we are winning. We've seen 100 judgments against Trump that have slowed him down. What we're trying to do, I think, is have the conversations, as the Congresswoman talked about. Our governors, our AGs, our mayors are trying to figure out how do we protect people. So as a party, I think we need to keep that up. I think we need to actually be louder in talking about it and go to people where they are. But also, this isn't just about Democrats. This is about Republicans doing their job to hold Trump accountable and be a check on power. And it's about the American people. And that's, when we talk about democracy, that's why this moment is so important.
Yeah, two quick things. First, professional, and second one, personal. All this polling still shows that the American public still trusts Donald Trump by a margin of 7% over congressional Democrats to take care of major problems in America.
Although congressional Dems are leading over congressional Republicans.
Just last polling. And then real quickly, Dana knows this. I just want to, my wife was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, got a pretty bad diagnosis, just underwent some pretty serious surgery at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa. And just want to thank the doctors and nurses there, all our friends and family that have continued to support my wife this past week, and tell her I think she's a rock star. Hang in there. We're all praying and pulling for you.
Amen.
We sure are.
Wow.
Kelly Urban, we love you. You are a complete badass.
Yeah, that's right. So many people are going through tough times now. You know, the best thing you could do is show love to people, hug them, tell them how much you love them, because a lot of people are going through so much. And now this is why I always say Trump is going to be the president for the next 4 years. So what are you going to do? Argue and keep talking trash about him? Well, I don't know if you want to do that for the next 4 years, because you want a better economy. You want low inflation. You want low interest rate. Okay. You want to be able to travel safe. All right. You don't want wars. So you want affordability. So the only way is to support this guy. He is right now the president of the United States, and he's doing his best to get this trade deals, all of this prices down for Americans. And most people are going to say, well, I don't want that. It's like, what are you talking about? You don't want fair
Joining us
trade
now to
deals?
analyze the coverage, Robbie Suave, senior editor at Reason Magazine, and Megan Hayes, a former top aide in the Biden campaign and White House. Robbie, Pete Hegseth certainly didn't help himself. The New York Times quoting 4 people familiar with the chat as saying that he did share this with family members. I have no independent reporting on this, but it does seem that the press is absolutely out to get him.
Absolutely out to get him. They have been from the start drumming up all sorts of the personal controversies he's had during his confirmation hearing. But what I find so interesting is this leak system that's apparently taking place. But of course, we know for the initial signal chat, the responsible party, it's Jeffrey Goldberg at The Atlantic, was in it because of Mike Walls. We know that's why it happened.
He was inadvertently invited, and that wasn't Pete Hegseth's fault at all.
Yeah, but that guy, there's been no accountability for that guy. So I found it so weird that the press focuses on Hegseth when we know the identity of the person who led to the initial controversy. I think that, to your point, shows how the media just wants to claim Hegseth as a scalp because maybe he's a figure of Fox News, a conservative media personality. And the Trump administration's policy is no scalps. Just because the media tells us we shouldn't like someone, that is no credit to that view.
I have a question here. Does the media want a scalp? You've already answered that.
Oh, yeah.
Are the media a good target for Pete Hegseth in this environment?
No, it's rich coming from someone who was a member of the media. And the reason that they're not going after Mike Walls is because he did not share classified information on a Signal chat. And it's not just that he shares classified information, it's he's now done it again. He had a separate internet line installed in his office, which goes against all types of security protocols here. So it's not that the media is out to get him. He's actually done things that are against protocols here. And if I did this, having a security clearance, I would have been fired immediately.
I want to come back to that, but the point that you sort of alluded to, I think, and you tell me if this is wrong, that most journalists resent Pete Hegseth. And the reason they resent him is that He was a weekend host here at Fox who didn't have the usual resume of somebody who would be in charge of the Pentagon. Is that affecting the tone of the coverage?
Oh, 100%. And there's a kind of, if you have experience and expertise, you get treated more favorably by the press, even if ideologically you're still at odds with them. I think Marco Rubio benefits from that he's a smoother operator in terms of D.C. and in terms of the press. Hegseth has been combative with the media for years and years and years, and that's affecting him. But behind the surface, I think we're missing the forest for the trees to some degree with this whole story. There is an ideological difference within the MAGA coalition on foreign policy, including within the Pentagon. Some of these people have been pushed out, are more America first. They don't want open conflict with Iran. That's the real story behind the scenes, is that faction seems to be pushing out and losing an ideological battle. But the press is focused on, how well Hegseth is, rising to the moment or not. There's an actual foreign policy thing at stake, which is whether we're going to be at war with Iran.
Almost like covering a campaign. And so there's a drip going on there. Every little thing gets blown up. So, for example, and you alluded to this, Signal, it's on his computer. Well, it turns out that at this giant building across the river, most of it doesn't have cell service. That is a scandal. I don't understand why they can't fix that. You have these media reports that Hegseth shouted at the acting Joint Chiefs chairman, said he was going to give him a polygraph, didn't turn out to give him a polygraph, that 5 top officials have now either been fired or resigned in these leak investigations. And so that's led to a lot of stories about chaos and dysfunction, Megan.
Yeah, absolutely. But the reason that the Pentagon doesn't have cell service is because most of the information that is discussed there is secure. And so most of those offices are secure facilities, SCIFs. So they are not supposed to have their cell phones or any outside sources in there for the exact reason of not leaking confidential information. So that's why a lot of the building does not have cell service. But I also think that people are targeting Hegseth because what he is doing is putting the military at risk. And I think that the broader American people see that. And I think that is what the story is, as well as the Iran issue.
Well, there is this whole semantic debate, and we went through this on the earlier Signal chat controversy, about whether the information was classified or not. The New York Times story about sharing with family members didn't use the word classified. It kind of sidestepped that. And personally, I can't think of anything that should more be classified than, he says they're not texting war plans. The timing of the planned bombing raid against the Houthi terrorists, as well as what military equipment was being used, were that to leak out. Fortunately, it did not. That could have endangered our military people.
Well, and the government does routine over-classification, I would argue, of everything. They would classify their grocery list. This is a constant bane for transparency-oriented journalists, that they classify everything. So the idea that this and this alone would be something you could share doesn't really make sense. But it goes back to the broader, you used a phrase just now, this is not how it's done. This is not the way we do it. Without defending Hegseth on this particular thing, it is kind of you're trying to do things differently than the way things have been done, and you're not allowed to do that. But that is frustrating, I think, for Trump people, because we brought Trump to power to change things, and now you're saying there's some inner process or system that thwarts us from having conversations about what our foreign policy should be. But didn't we win the election? Don't we get to determine what those processes and policies are? You're saying there's just a way it's always done, but
I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I do disagree that he should be allowed to tell people what the military plans are for a strike to his wife and to his lawyer over a unclassified system. But I agree with you. It's like this break glass mentality is what the Trump administration is doing. It's not boding well for his approval ratings right now, but I don't disagree that they are brought in to do something different.
The White House and DOD in their denial said, well, he didn't share classified information, but not necessarily disputing the facts. It doesn't make the story true, but nevertheless. NPR reported that, as things have kind of heated up, shall we say, that we have a situation where the White House is denying the NPR report that Trump, as a kind of a backup plan, is looking for possible replacements. Why won't the media accept that Trump is standing by his guy?
Well, the media misses the era in which they mattered to people on the right
This
at
is
all.
a desperate cry for relevance?
Yeah, they're like, but wait, we're supposed to say, no, this guy, it's not just we disagree with him, but he's scandal-plagued, and we're showing out you the scandals, so you got to get rid of him, right? And the Trump administration is looking at them saying, No. They might get rid of him.
Yeah.
They could totally happen, but they will not tell the press ahead of time they're doing that. They will not attribute it to anything mainstream media does. What conservative media has to say about it might matter, but what the mainstream media says about the fitness or the level of scandal of any Trump figure, that does not matter to the president and his people whatsoever. In fact, it makes them like the person more, probably.
Oh, that's interesting. The more you get beat up by the media, the more sympathy there is, at least among the president's supporters.
I just think that if Pete Hegseth wanted this story to go away, he would stop doing interviews, sort of like Scott Jennings said in your opening package.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. Like, just don't talk to the press. But how does that help?
And then you just keep giving it legs. So if you just stop talking about it and stop giving press more fuel for their fire, this will go away, and NPR wouldn't have to be reporting that they're looking for people. So everyone is just giving this more oxygen.
I mean, he was cornered during the Easter egg hunt. He couldn't not answer questions
right,
of the press.
Then he went on TV. That was like the day after that reporting, but they just keep going with it, and I think that's a major problem.
Right. No, that was interesting because of the musical accompaniment in the background. Now, here's
the Easter bunny in the background.
Here's a story that I think is complete and total BS, and that is about Hegseth wanting a makeup room at the Pentagon. Now, if you think about it, I mean, there was some question about how much it would cost, and they scaled it back. But, I mean, you think they don't get makeup at the White House? I mean, these people are on TV every day, and they want to look good. You wear more makeup than us, so what do you think?
I mean, I think I don't know what the rooms look like at the Pentagon. I don't. The room they showed on TV, I think it's fine. I don't think they should be paying taxpayer dollars to refit to makeup rooms.
Why?
Why? Because taxpayer dollars should not be going to makeup rooms. If Pete Hegseth wants a makeup room, he can pay for that makeup room, just like as if they had to do that in the White House. The president would have to pay for his own makeup if he was doing something outside of a television interview being provided for him.
All right. I profoundly.
I mean, what in the world? Makeup room. Okay. The Pentagon needs a makeup room. I don't know about that.
Joining us now, Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy. Senator, welcome back
John
to Fox
Kennedy.
News Sunday.
There we go.
All right, let me start there. You hear that these attacks continue overnight, although President Trump has said to President Putin, you got to stop it, knock it off. There are brand new polling numbers that we've got out today that the American people do not think President Trump is handling this well. His job approval on handling Russia and Ukraine is at 36% and 39%, respectively. Is it foolish to think that Putin does want peace? And will he be emboldened if part of this deal includes giving him territory?
I think, Shannon, America is paying the price right now for President Biden's appeasement. The Biden people believed in diplomacy, first, last, and always. We're in a knife fight with Russia and China and Iran, and the Biden people wanted to quote Socrates to them. I see what you see. Here's what I see. Putin has reneged on every promise that he has made to President Trump. His latest proposal is, well, nothing. He wants to keep all the territory that he's taken. He wants to prohibit Ukraine from joining NATO, and he wants America and Europe to stop helping Ukraine. I think that Putin thinks that America has taken the bullet train to Chunktown. I think he thinks we're afraid of him. He has jacked around President Trump at every turn. He has disrespected our president. I don't think it's going to get any better until we make it clear to Mr. Putin that we are willing to turn him and his country into fish food. And I'm not talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear war. I would start with oil, which I will be glad to talk about if you want.
Well, and there has been some discussion. Obviously, there are sanctions on Russia, and it begs the question whether that's getting their attention, whether more sanctions will make more of a difference. I know that there are all kinds of things happening with where its oil ends up, and some of that's in violation of the sanctions. So do we need better enforcement against other countries that are violating that? Where do we go from here on getting Russia's attention?
Well, America, under President Biden, and Europe agreed that Russia can continue to sell its oil as long as they don't get more than $60 a barrel. Russia gets 1/3 of its revenues from oil. We need to stop all of the sales of oil. We need to get Russia down and choke them. They're not going to come to the table otherwise. I want a settlement in Ukraine. We also have to ask Europe to do better. Europe's got to start paying its own bills. If it wasn't for the American taxpayer, Putin would be in Paris right now. Europe's got to do more. But mainly, we've got to make Putin understand that there is a price to be paid for his jacking our president around.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to get that at this point. I want to ask you about Iran as well, because we just wrapped another round of talks with them. President Trump was asked by Time Magazine, this lengthy interview he had with them, about whether he worries about the U.S., quote, being dragged into a military situation with Iran because Israel takes action. But here's what he said. I may go in very willingly. If we can't get a deal, if we don't make a deal, I'll be leading the pack. What do you think happens if we get militarily involved with a strike on Iran?
Well, we're involved militarily with Iran. Iran hates America as much as it hates Israel. I would love to see a settlement with Iran, but Iran can't have access, directly or indirectly, to nuclear weapons. If Iran gets a weapon or is days away from getting a weapon, there will be a war. Iran won't start it, and America won't start it. Israel will. And Israel knows that if Iran gets a bomb, Israel is a smoke turkey. The first thing Iran will do will be to bomb Israel. And Israel's not going to tolerate that, and I don't blame them.
All right, I want to make sure I get to a couple of other things with you. Legally, you're an attorney, as am I. You have said that you will call out President Trump loudly if you think he is not following federal courts and the orders that they have. The Supreme Court has made some statements about what the administration should be doing with respect to getting Kilmer Obrego Garcia back from El Salvador. They've admitted that was a mistake. You've talked about them making a mistake with that, too. But federal judge Paula Zinnes does not think this administration is complying with that order. Here's a little bit of her order from April 22nd coming down on the Trump administration, saying there's been a continued mischaracterization of the Supreme Court's order. She's used the word specious. She said there's been willful and intentional noncompliance. Now, the president's legal team sees that order to facilitate and effectuate his return differently, clearly, than Paula Zinnes, the judge, sees that. What do you think the Supreme Court meant, and do you think the administration's in compliance?
I don't think President Trump has defied any federal orders. I don't know what these judges expect the federal government to do. Bukele has said he's not returning Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia is not coming back to the United States, ever. I don't.
Thank you for being here. God bless you guys. I will address shrimp, or lobster after this video.
I think the federal courts can direct the executive branch to go in and try to take Mr. Garcia by force. I also think that Mr. Bukele in El Salvador is taking advice from China. He's much closer to China than he is to the United States. People don't realize that. And I think China is loving all this turmoil. I don't think that let me say it again, I don't think the president has defied any orders of a judge, nor should he. I believe in the rule of law. If you don't like a judge's opinion, you can criticize it. You can appeal it. That's why God made courts of appeal. If you're an elected official, you can quit if somebody orders you to defy it, but you can't defy it. That won't undermine the legitimacy of our entire system. But I don't think that President Trump has done that. I just don't know what these federal judges expect the executive branch to do.
Well, so much of this legal action has to do with immigration, deportation, the border. I want to read something from our next guest, Congressman Adam Smith, speaking to that issue. He says this: there are a lot of people in this country, undocumented, who should be allowed to stay. They have been a vital part of our economy. They are vital parts of our community. He says deporting them is often separating families. It's sending people back to countries they aren't even familiar with. What's your response to him?
Well, I have great respect for the congressman. What he has said would be interesting if it were true. Illegal immigration is illegal. Duh. If you don't like the law, change it. But you have to follow the law. The American people support legal immigration, but they don't support illegal immigration. They see the border like they see their front door. Most Americans lock their front door at night. They don't lock their front door because they hate everybody on the outside. No. They lock their front door because they love the people on the inside. And they want to know who's coming in and out of their home. The congressman and his party allowed 8 to 12 million people to come into our country illegally. And we don't have the slightest idea who they are. That's like adding 4 Nebraskas. If they would be, they believe in open borders. I mean, that's clear to me. Nobody is so incompetent as to allow that many people to come into our country. It has to be intentional. And the Democrats would be a lot more intellectually honest if they would just admit that they believe in open borders.
Well, I will ask him about that. Senator Kennedy, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor.
Thank you for tuning in into the live show. All right. It is time to address the trolls in the comment talking about Genesis is not even in the United States. He's not. All right, here we go. So instead of talking too much, I'm going to just show y'all. So this is me, my beautiful 5-year-old daughter, and my mother-in-law here. This is 4 days ago, ladies and gentlemen. This was the White House Easter egg roll. We got an invite, and I took my mother-in-law and my 5-year-old daughter because my wife is an angel now. May her soul rest in peace. But this is just for the trolls in the comment section. Here you go. I know Shrill's Shrimp 200 and Shrimp Sauce, they're the same person. That's how trolls do. They have 2-3 channels, and they come on your page and they try to, cause an uproar because they get attention here. They never get attention in their mom's basement or their dad's basement. So they come here because they get attention, which this is what we want. We want to show love to people, and it's free speech here. I'm a big boy. I can take whatever you say, okay? Whatever you say, I can take it. All right? Just love your country, okay? Support the United States. Whatever you call me, I get it. It is not, it's really a reflection of you, not of me. Okay? It's not a reflection of me. It's a reflection of you if you cannot, have some common sense. However, with that being said, just love the United States, okay? You don't have to support Genesis, but support the United States. Can you support your country? That's all I ask, yo.
American voters this morning about the president's handling of the economy. From some farmers, the concern is existential. Here with me now is Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins. Secretary Rollins, thank you so much for being here. I want to start with those falling economic numbers for President Trump in our new poll out this morning. He just hit the lowest approval on the economy ever, including his first term. 2/3 of Americans roughly disapprove of his job on tariffs. What does this say about his economic strategy?
Well, Dana, first of all, thank you so much for having me on again, and really appreciate the time. So I think the first and most important thing that is really relevant to today is this president has never, ever governed by poll. And I just saw those same numbers, too, so I haven't had a chance to dig in. But the second thing is that there are 100 different polls that say 100 different things. At the end of the day, President Trump is resolutely focused on ensuring that we are realigning fueling the American economy, to put Americans first. And again, he's never worried about this poll yesterday or that poll tomorrow. He has a vision, and I saw it working with him in the first term, see it again the second term, that we have to put America first. And as the Secretary of Agriculture, I have now seen firsthand how our products and our people are treated around the world, and it's just time to realign that. So that's what he's doing, and really, I think that we're really excited about what this means for the future, even if there's some uncertainty today.
Well, you mentioned uncertainty, and I understand, what you're saying about the polls, but what the new CNN poll and others like it reflect is uncertainty and also pain, and people are pretty upset and worried, concerned about their economic situation.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple of things to note here. The first is this, that in the first 100 days, which we're about to mark this week, I think, the first 100 days, there's been a 95% decrease in illegal border crossings. Number two, inflation has come down, even if just a little bit, but for the first time since the last Trump administration. So border security, bringing the cost of goods down. Number three, law and order and arresting terrorists. 74 terrorists have been arrested in my world, in agriculture and making America healthy again. We've had a lot of accomplishments, energy, et cetera. That while we're talking about the economy, Dana, to your question, we are in that time of uncertainty, but the prices and costs for the average American consumer are on their way down, while at the same time, so we've got $7 trillion that has been basically promised to reshore back into America for jobs, for Americans, et cetera, as we're realigning the government. So again, I believe that poll is just one snapshot, perhaps of one day, that may not even be entirely accurate. But we, again, are convicted and resolute on this plan. We move forward. We've got 100 countries that have, approached us for retrading and trade renegotiations. And what that means for the American people is real certainty and real prosperity moving forward.
So let's talk about that. I do just want to say, because during the 2024 campaign, the price of eggs got a lot of attention. They're now about $6 a dozen. So it's still pretty high. But let's look forward, Secretary Rollins. You said that there are, 100 deals that are almost in the works. The president told Time magazine, quote, "I have made 200 deals." He didn't give us any details about what those could be, what countries he's talking about. Has he actually inked any trade deals, and with whom?
Give him some time.
Well, Dana, first of all, let me address the eggs because that's an important point. So when we took over, when the president was sworn in, the price of eggs had increased 237% under the last administration. I mean, we obviously food under the last administration, the average increase was 25 to 30%, but eggs specifically. And I know I've got a bunch of kids and a big family, and a lot of Americans are trying to feed their family. Eggs are so important to that, and as they're increasing that significant amount, that was a big issue.
Yeah.
The president jokes that on day one, everyone's yelling at him about the price of eggs. He's like, I just got here. But we unveiled a 5-point plan a little over a month ago. And you mentioned the numbers, but when you look at the wholesale cost of eggs, which drives the retail cost, the retail will follow soon. The actual wholesale cost of eggs is down 58% in the last 6 weeks. So other parts of the country, we've seen a significant decline in the retail cost. Some parts of the country, it has not followed yet, but it's coming. So I think that's an important point to make.
Okay, let's focus on the
trade
deals.
and on the deals. Yes, for sure. On the deals, we have 100 countries that are knocking on the door. I believe, I'm not in the room, I'm not negotiating the trade deals, but my understanding is we should have several this week that are coming forward that are very, very close. China is a very important one. Every day we are in conversation with China, along with those other 9,900 countries that have come to the table. Many countries have already flown to Washington and are meeting with Secretary Lutnick, meeting with Secretary Besant, meeting with our USTR, Jamieson Greer, and there is a tremendous amount of progress on all fronts that we'll see again more this week.
You said that there are talks with China every day. Who are the talks with and at what level? Because the Chinese are saying that's not true.
Well, according to our team in Washington, the conversations are ongoing regarding multiples of trade, but here, multiples of the trade goods that are coming out and going in. But the bottom line with China is this: they need us more than we need them. They need our money. They need our markets, they need our consumers, and all of the above. So the president has been, I believe, exactly correct. I mean, he is the ultimate deal maker. You know, it's a time where we've got to hold China accountable. And in agriculture, year upon year, decade upon decade, our goods have been taken advantage of. The trade disparity, the non-trade tariffs on top of the tariff numbers are insane, whether it's Argentina or China or Brazil or the UK. I could go country by country with you and just talk about how they treat our beef, what they do with our pork, how our soybeans are taken advantage of. And that's my world, right? The agriculture world. But it's true across all lanes of our industry.
And on that note, I want to stick with your world of agriculture, because you said China needs the U.S., but there are some indicators that they're looking elsewhere, specifically when it comes to farming. They dramatically cut back on buying U.S. soybeans, instead turning to Brazil and Argentina. China is planning to purchase less U.S. pork, down 72% in just a week. So at least in the short term, it is obviously hurting American farmers. What are they supposed to do now?
Well, listen, the farmers, no one supports President Trump more than our farmers and ranchers in our rural communities. And you're right, our soybean farmers, some of our row croppers, some of our pork, et cetera, they certainly are they're more in the crosshairs than a lot of our other agriculture industry. But for the most part, every farmer I've talked to says we understand this and we are with you. And we also know that President Trump will ensure that if there are significant economic damages, that just as in the first term under the China deal phase one, that we will be, the harm will be mitigated. And so we're already preparing for that. I don't think we're going to need it, but if we do, it will be there. But Dana, to answer your question, the bottom line is this. We are opening up and expanding markets across the world. I'll be in the UK. I'll be in Vietnam. I will be in Japan. I will be in Brazil. I will be in Peru. This is all in just the coming months. That in the last administration, we went from a $0 trade deficit when President Trump left for agriculture to an almost $50 billion trade deficit after the Biden administration on agriculture. There just wasn't much effort around the world to open these markets up. J.D. Vance was just in India. We see them as a massive trading partner moving forward.
So
you know, if we
see
can come
that
to the right
there
resolution
will
in
be
the right
deals.
terms.
So you see there will be deals with other countries, perhaps, to make up for whatever the problems are with regard to China?
It is going to be a new era of market expansion around the world, and our team is so committed to that. So I think we fix a lot of what's wrong with the China and the Brazil, et cetera, but we also open up new markets. I mean, countries are knocking on our door right now. They want our goods. Our agriculture products are the best in the world. They're the most productive. We feed not only our country, we feed the world. They're 100% safe. And so that's what a lot of these countries are asking for, and that's what our incredible team in Washington is moving toward.
Before I let you go, and Trump 1.0, when the farmers were hurting with the first round of trade negotiations with China, there was a bailout from the federal government. Will that happen again?
Right. Well, we will ensure, first of all, the prayer is that doesn't need to happen. But secondly, if it does for the short term, just as in Trump 1, we are preparing for that. I think it's important to note, though, that we won't really know the consequences really until harvest time, which will be later this summer, early in the fall. But we are watching it and analyzing it every single day, and we're preparing for it. I'm on constant conversations with our friends on the Hill, where the funding comes from, and everyone is committed to ensuring our farmers and our ranchers, which food security is national security. So it isn't just about protecting the farmers and ranchers. It's protecting the great American experiment and the American dream.
Thanks.
Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, thank you so much for being here.
Shout out to the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins. For sure, this is why I admire the Trump administration. You can say what you want to say. You can say they're incompetent or whatever, but you could never say they do not hold themselves accountable to the people. They come out here, they tell you how things are going. They never duck interviews. You never duck interviews. You never hear what's your favorite ice cream flavors when you ask Trump a question. Like when you see the Oval Office, the press corps is in there asking this man hard questions. Okay, this is why I admire
Here
the
with me
Trump
now
administration.
is the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer of New York.
All right, Chuck
Senator, thank
Schumer,
you
here we
so
go.
much for being here. We do have a lot to get to. I do want to start with developments with regard to Russia and Ukraine. The president met one-on-one with President Zelensky. Both sides called that meeting productive. Afterwards, President Trump criticized Vladimir Putin's attacks on Ukraine and said, quote, maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently. As the Democratic leader in the Senate, you're a member of the so-called Gang of Eight. You see intelligence about how the war is going. Are you supportive of these negotiations?
Well, look, my great fear, Dana, is that Trump will just cave into Putin. That's been the overall indications all along. And of course, the bottom line is very simple, that if we cave to Putin, if Trump caves into Putin, it's bad in three very bad ways. Number one, to just abandon Ukraine after all the sacrifice that they made, after so much loss of life, and with the rallying of the whole West against Putin, it would just be a moral tragedy to undercut Zelensky, which I believe Trump is headed in that direction. Second, it tears asunder our alliances with Europe. The Europeans have stood up for us. The whole West has stood up for us. They put in money. They've used all kinds of diplomatic and economic tools to back us. And how is Europe going to trust us ever again if Trump backs out? But third, and maybe worst of all, it's a sign that the United States is weak. It sends a signal to every dictator in China, in North Korea, in Iran, that if you stand up and bully Trump, you're going to get your way. So I am very worried about where he is headed. I think that he is in a position where he feels he can sell out Zelensky. He's sort of saying yes one day, no the next day. But overall, the trend is very, very bad.
Let's turn to what's happening here at home. The ACLU says the Trump administration deported 3 U.S. citizen children with their families, including one suffering from metastatic cancer. A judge overseeing one of the cases expressed his, quote, strong suspicion that the government just deported a U.S. citizen with no meaningful process. If that's the case, and the federal government deported U.S. citizens with no due process, what can you, as one of the top elected officials in the country, do about it?
Well, first, what he's doing here is just outrageous and against every iota of what Americans believe. And this is not the only instance. There are reportedly other instances where U.S. citizen children were deported without any due process. Due process is a hallmark of what our country is all about, rule of law, and ICE and Trump seem to break it in every single way. He believes he's a king. He is not. And the American people are totally against what he is doing in this regard. The polling that you showed today and the data from the other New York Times and Washington Post shows the same thing. We are highlighting this in every way we can because the more the American people know, the better. That's why Chris Van Hollen went to El Salvador last week. That is why Democrats are talking about this in town hall meetings across the country. And the more the American people know, the less they're going to like what Trump does.
Your colleague from Georgia, Senator John Ossoff, told voters at a town hall that he strongly agrees that President Trump should be impeached. Do you agree with him? Would that be a priority if Democrats were to take back Congress?
Well, look, right now, President Trump is violating rule of law in every way. And we're fighting him every single day in every way. And our goal is to show the American people over and over again, whether it's the economy, whether it's tariffs, whether it's Russia and overseas, and whether it's rule of law, how bad he is. And, it's 2 years is too far away to predict. Our job is day to day to day to show who Trump is, what he is doing, and it's having an effect, as
But
your
you're not
poll
ruling
showed.
out.
The American people are realizing.
You're not saying no.
Look, it's too far away to even judge.
Okay. I do want to get to the economy because you mentioned our new poll. It does show the American people souring on Trump's handling of the economy, nearly 2/3 disapproving of how he is dealing with tariffs and inflation in particular. He
Right.
told us explicitly, Senator, what he would do during his campaign. He said very specifically what he would do on tariffs and other issues relating to the economy. And voters still chose him over Democrats. How do you explain that?
Look, the bottom line is that no one realized the chaos. It's not tariffs themselves. I've been tough on China, and there are certain tariffs against China that are appropriate. But what he did was totally chaotic. He turned the whole world against us. Instead of focusing on China and getting the world to join us because they don't like what China does, he imposed tariffs across the board on nation after nation after nation, and now they're being allied with China. In addition, he never told the American people the kinds of tariffs he were imposing across the board, and some of them very, very high, would raise their costs. It's estimated it'll raise the American costs. American families would have to pay about $4,000 more a year. The price of food and clothing and gasoline, buying a new car, all would go up dramatically. And so he never leveled with the American people, and no one ever imagined it would be as chaotic and as poorly planned. One person says one thing one day, another person says another thing the next day, and another terrible effect it's having, Dana, on this is that businesses, I've been all around my state. I've been in 6 different districts of Republicans talking to them, talking to the people about tariffs. And small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and large businesses are frozen. Even, because they don't know what Trump will do next. And that's heading us into a recession. And what does a recession mean to the average family? You could lose your job, harder to get a new job, costs go up. So the American people are furious. The promises Trump made are far different than how it's been effectuated, and that's why his 100 days are a disaster.
Let me turn to your party, the Democratic Party, and where you are right now in the quest to try to overtake Republicans, certainly in the short term, in the midterms. Republicans have been facing a lot of heat at town halls, but also Democrats have been as well. And there's a lot of frustration towards members of your party, not just from voters, but we're even hearing it from members of your own caucus. I want you to listen to your colleague, Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, what he said this week.
I am furious with the Democratic Party because, in my view, our inability to offer a compelling vision and articulate it to the American people has resulted in Donald Trump being elected not just once but twice. We need to come to grips with that, and we need to ask ourselves why that is.
What do you think?
Well, look, no, we're doing very well. We are totally united in focusing on Trump on a single message when it, for instance, on tariffs, how chaotic they are and how they have to be focused, on rule of law, how he's not obeying it, and we're showing that to the American people, but also on this upcoming reconciliation bill, where we Democrats have a single message, that Trump is trying to make the middle class pay for tax cuts for billionaires. Our whole party, every member of our caucus is united on that issue. Americans hate it, and we are going after them day after day. As I mentioned, I went to 6 Republican districts during our recent Easter Passover break, and talking to the voters, Republican districts, about what Trump is doing and how their congressmen ought not be embracing him. And then 4 of them signed a letter saying, well, they don't want to cut Medicaid. And so we are really united and focused and strong. The contrast that we are making between who the Democratic Party is, the party for working people, and who the Republican Party is, the party for billionaires and especially privileged people, is having a real effect. And that's why he's doing so poorly in these first 100 days. I think we're on our front foot, and every day we are fighting Trump on multiple fronts.
So there's the message, sir, and then there's the messenger.
And when your very longtime friend, former roommate and colleague, Senator Dick Durbin, announced his retirement this week after 3 decades in the Senate, he said, quote, "It's time to pass the torch." We've heard that from other retiring Democrats, Gary Peters, Tina Smith, Jeanne Shaheen. They've all said it's time to let the next generation of leaders take over. Now, you indicated this week that you're going to stay put, Senate Democratic leader for this foreseeable future. Why don't you think it's time to pass the torch?
Look, I am focused on winning, as I have always been, and as leader of the caucus, we are united. Now, we have a lot of talent in the caucus, and my job is sort of an orchestra leader to get us play on the same theme, as you said, I've said, we're united on message, but to highlight all the talent in the caucus in different ways, and we've seen that.
And you're staying put.
With Cory Booker, with so many others. And so, of course, yes, I am staying put, and I'm fighting the fight every day, as is our caucus, in a united and successful way, as you've seen by your poll and other polls. We're showing America how bad Trump is and showing that Republicans who embrace Trump do so at their peril.
As President Trump is now closing in on the 100-day mark of his second term, that's this Tuesday. A new CNN poll out this morning shows his approval rating dropping to 41%. That is the lowest for any newly elected president at the 100-day mark in at least 7 decades. Keep in mind here, too, it is not just his overall approval numbers that are on the decline. The president's handling of foreign affairs is now at 39% approval. That's down from 42% just last month. And it comes as the Trump administration's top diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, says this will be a, quote, very critical week in determining whether the U.S. will continue its efforts to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. CNN senior White House reporter Kevin Liptak joining us now. So in terms of this week ahead of high-stakes diplomacy, what more can you tell us about what is on deck?
Well, I think it's clear that the president is getting frustrated that his attempts to broker an end to this war have so far not borne fruit. Remember, he said he'd be able to do it within 24 hours of taking office. Now we're butting up on the 100-day mark, and it's clear that Trump and members of his team are concerned that this could all be essentially a waste of their time. And so it is setting up quite a critical stretch of days. We heard today from Marco Rubio saying that this will be the week that President Trump decides whether to continue these efforts to pursue a negotiated settlement in Ukraine or to move on to other issues. Listen to more of the top diplomat.
This is going to be a very critical week. This week is going to be a really important week in which we have to make a determination about whether this is an endeavor that we want to continue to be involved in, or if it's time to sort of focus on some other issues that are equally, if not more important in some cases. But we want to see it happen. There are reasons to be optimistic, but there are reasons to be realistic, of course, as well. We're close, but we're not close enough.
Now, in some ways, this is not a new message from Rubio. He has said before that time is vanishingly short to try and reach an end to this war. What's not necessarily clear is whether this is a negotiating tactic to try and put pressure on Ukraine and Russia, or whether Trump and his team are serious about walking away from these talks. And Rubio's telling this past week was an opportunity for them to try and ascertain exactly how serious both sides of this are. You had Steve Witkoff, the president's foreign envoy in Moscow, talking to Vladimir Putin. You also had U.S. officials talking with their Ukrainian counterparts in London, but it's not clear as of this morning how close the two sides are to coming to some kind of deal. We heard from the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, who said that there was still some fine-tuning to do on this peace plan. We've also heard from Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who says that he can't sign off on a number of the American proposals that are in place to try and end this war. Certainly the fear among among European officials is that Putin is just trying to string these talks along. He thinks that time is on his side. In fact, it sounds as if President Trump may believe that as well, based on his post yesterday when he said that he thought Putin may be tapping him along. I think this all adds up to an uncertain fate for the Ukrainian peace talks, but it will be an important moment, I think, on that 100-day mark if this war has not ended, which it certainly doesn't look like it will be.
Yeah, given that we are 2 days out from that 100-day mark, it would be quite something if we heard of it tomorrow. Kevin, really appreciate it. Thank you. Also joining me this hour, David Sanger, CNN political and national security analyst. David, as we look at all of this, I think Kevin makes a really good point that the question now is seeing these repeated comments from Secretary Rubio. Just about 10 days, a week ago, it was, we could leave this in a matter of days. Now he says this is basically a make or break week. Is it your sense, based on your sources, that this is in fact more of a negotiation move on the part of the White House, on the part of the administration, to put pressure on Russia? Or does it really mean it could be days away from the U.S. walking out?
Well, Erica, they want to put pressure on both parties. I'm not sure they're actually as interested in putting the pressure on Russia as they are on Mr. Zelensky, who obviously met here in Rome yesterday with President Trump. The reason I say that is that Mr. Zelensky is passing around an alternative peace treaty proposal, or at least ceasefire proposal, one that would put much greater burden on Russia, including Russia paying reparations to Ukraine, one in which the territory issues are kicked down the road some, one in which Russia would basically have to let Ukraine build up a security presence to keep the Russian forces from taking over the rest of the country at some point in the future. And I think that President Trump has looked at that and realized Vladimir Putin is going to reject this. So he's trying to find some kind of a middle ground. My own view is that President Trump isn't that concerned about what the details of a ceasefire are, as long as he can get the ceasefire and move to his bigger objective, which is to normalize relations with Russia, get Ukraine off the table.
It's interesting, too. I noticed in that interview today on Meet the Press, Secretary Rubio almost downplaying the lack of penalties on Russia. He was asked specifically, Kristen, asking him about what about, these new Russian sanctions? What would that mean? He says adding any sanctions now, all that would do would really prolong the war. Take a closer listen.
We're still hoping to see that this effort works out in diplomacy and that we can bring these two sides closer together. I mean, the minute you start doing that kind of stuff, you're walking away from it. You've now doomed yourself to another 2 years of war, and we don't want to see it happen.
He says they don't want to get there. I mean, later in the interview, he did say more than once, both sides need to get something. Both sides needs to give something up. But again, sort of to your point, it is this question about, is this really about preserving or somehow, I guess, improving the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin?
So I think one of the most interesting parts of Secretary Rubio's statement there, Erica, is that there's not a whole lot of utility right now for them in putting more sanctions on Russia. And the Russians know it. And there's not a lot left to sanction. When the president was saying the other day, maybe we'll put tariffs on Russian goods. Well, we're not importing any Russian goods. We haven't been for years. Even before the war broke out, there wasn't much that Russia made that we wanted. So that's a pretty empty threat, and Putin knows it. The bigger opportunity here is to open up with Russia, I think, in the president's mind, to get American oil companies in, to get gas flowing again, all areas where the U.S. could profit. And of course, that's the way he looks at Ukraine as well, with the great yet unsigned minerals agreement, which the president, you may remember, said was going to be signed last Thursday, and that was gone too.
Yeah, there is a lot there. That is for sure. And to be a fly on the wall in any of those conversations, but specifically between the two presidents there, the Vatican. Yeah. David, really appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Tuesday will mark President Trump's 100th day in office. We have a brand new CNN poll.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. Of course, now you know they're going to talk about Trump's approval rating. Check this out. His first 100 days.
Americans are turning on him after propelling him back into office just 6 months ago. According to this brand new poll, Trump's approval rating now standing at just 41%. To give you some context, that is the lowest for any president at this point in his term in the history of modern polling, going all the way back to Eisenhower. This beats the record Trump himself set at the 100-day mark of his first term back in 2017. Trump's approval sliding down 7 points from just late February. There's very little good news in this poll, and for the president, and CNN's chief data analyst, Harry Enton, is joining us here in Washington to break down the numbers. Harry, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
You're here, brand new polling. Where are we 100 days, almost 100 days into President Trump's second term as compared to his first?
I mean, these numbers are just horrible. There's no way to sugarcoat it. And the first way we'll sort of point that out is we'll look at where Donald Trump is now versus where he was 100 days into his first presidency. And you see it here. You don't have to be a mathematical genius. 41% approve of him now. It was 44% back in 2017 around the 100-day mark. And what's so notable here is that throughout his second term as president, he tended to be running ahead of where he was in his first term. No longer is that the case. He has fallen below where he was at this point in his first term. Of course, this is just Trump. Let's compare him to other presidents. And I really think this kind of puts a bow on it. And you can see it here. You see the 41%. That is 12 points below Joe Biden. That's 3 points below where he was in his first term. Look at where Obama was, 63%. He's 22 points below that. And George W. Bush at this point in 2001, he is, I mean, again, 21 points below. And as you pointed out in your opening, Jessica Dean, I look back at all of the polling we possibly could long before I was born. And Trump's 41% at 100 days is the worst on record. He has broken his own record for being the worst. The American people do not like what they are seeing at this point from Donald John Trump.
It's just also amazing to see the 60s
not that long ways away.
Yeah, now Trump ran obviously on immigration and the economy. What kind of marks are people giving him on those two issues?
Yeah, okay, so let's take a look at the issues, right? Because it's not just about overall, it's about the issues. There's only one data point where Trump is above 45%. It comes to his handling of gender identity policy. He's at 51%. Every other issue, immigration, where he has long been above water, look at this, below water, 45%. How about the economy? My goodness gracious, he was elected to fix the economy, just 39%. And of course, the tariff war, 34% on that. I mean, the bottom line here is just very simply the numbers for Donald Trump are awful, awful, awful in this poll. And then, of course, you look again on the economy, we compare it to where we were back in 2017. You see the 49% there. Look here, 39%, 10 points below where he was. I'm going to make the green mark a little bit better there, 49%. And again, I went back and looked at all the presidents I possibly could since 1977, and Donald Trump on the economy here, it's not just the lowest for this term, it's the lowest for any president on record 100 days into a presidency. Just no bueno, Jessica.
That is really remarkable. Okay, so how confident are people that he's going to use the office of the presidency responsibly?
Yeah, okay, so we're talking about the issues. Let's just talk a little bit here about just the overall way that Donald Trump is going about his business, right? Use presidential power responsibly. No confidence Trump will. Well, back in December of 2024, it was 46%. Look at where we've jumped to now. 54% of Americans have no confidence that Trump will use the power of the presidency responsible. And so this just tells you on every single different data point you could possibly look at, whether it be Trump's overall approval, whether it be the issues for Donald Trump, or how he conducts himself in office, all of these numbers are pretty much terrible for Donald Trump at this point. And so you just see it here. 54% who say that no confidence he's going to use presidential power responsibly. It's just no good, Jessica.
All right, Harry, thank you so much for walking us through the numbers and joining us to break it all down this morning. The Wall Street Journal's Molly Ball, Joanna Coles of the Daily Beast, and Tia Mitchell of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Good morning to all of you. Thanks for being with us early this morning. Molly, I want to start with you first. I want to get all of your thoughts on this new polling. What's striking to you when you start looking into these numbers?
I think what is striking is the fact that Trump's ratings have slid across the board, right? There's been a clear trajectory in this and other polls really since the beginning of his second term. I think, number one, the fact that he's lost his advantage on the economy is a really big blinking red light that a lot of Republicans are concerned about, because for so long, that was his signature advantage. People could say, maybe I don't like, his character, maybe I don't like him overall, but I do like what he's doing with the economy. The fact that that has turned upside down and his ratings on the economy are now worse than his overall ratings is a really big red flag, I think, for him and for the entire Republican Party. And then just the fact that people don't like how fast he's moving. I think early on, a lot of what you heard, including in some sort of focus groups, was, well, at least he's doing something, right? He's moving fast, he's breaking things. We may not like every detail of, say, what Doge is up to, but at least he's doing things. We're tired of this sort of passive presidency where nothing gets done. And now you actually see the American people sort of saying, maybe we should put the brakes on.
Yeah, that is interesting. And Joanna, Trump also was doing well with independents. I mean, that's where you have to win the presidency, is to get independents on board. It is interesting to see that now he's down to 31% approval.
Well, I think it's important to point out, too, that this isn't just a CNN poll. This is Republicans who are saying this about Trump, and probably the most powerful voice this week has been Ken Griffin, a huge Republican donor who said that the country is 20% worse off since Trump was inaugurated, that the brand of America, which is not just a financial brand, it's a cultural brand, it's a military brand, has been really dinged. And I think not only has he lost independence, but you can see clearly within the Republican Party there is enormous concern. And you hear about the rows going on backstage with Scott Bessent at Treasury with Elon Musk, saying Elon Musk overpromised, saying he was going to cut $2 trillion. Of course, he's overpromised and underdelivered. It feels chaos, and you're seeing it reflected in the polls.
Yeah. Tia, should we be surprised by any of this?
So, in a way, yes and no. I think we all say, Trump ran on immigration. He ran on some of these culture war issues. He ran on really, turning the federal government upside down. But I think what the polling is showing us is even on the culture wars issues and on immigration, he still tied that into an economic message. He said, we're going to kick out the illegal immigrants because they're taking resources away from cities. They're taking your black and brown jobs. And so that has not turned out to be true. The economy has not turned around, even as he's cracked down on immigration. The economy has not turned around as he's focused on these culture wars. And I think that's what's being reflected in the polls. People are saying, you promised that you were going to help lower the cost of goods, put more money in our pocket, put more jobs in the economy, and that is not what's happened, even though you promised it would on day one. I don't think, quite frankly, President Trump is as worried about his approval ratings right now. He doesn't plan on being on the ballot again, even if he plans on remaining in the White House. But what I think is concerning to a lot of Republicans is the fact that they know these polls could mean a disaster for Congress in 2026. And he doesn't seem to be that concerned about that either.
I do think that is the key, right? Because in these midterms, it's going to be these all House members that are going to be on the ballot. It's going to be these congressional members that are going to have to face the consequences. And Trump, Harry, he's not going to have to.
Yeah, he's not going to have to, but I'll tell you, there is pretty much zero chance if Donald Trump's approval rating is 41% in November of 2026, the Republicans have any shot of holding the House of Representatives. There is no precedent for a president's approval rating being as low as Donald Trump's is right now, and then his party holding on to the House in the midterm elections. We were talking about it yesterday. I mean, when you look at approval ratings this low, this early, you look at where the generic ballot is this low, this early, that usually spells doom for the president's party when it comes to midterm elections.
Yeah, and to that point, Republican Don Bacon of Nebraska saying that maybe he's going to be considering retirement, trying to figure out if that's going to be worth it or not for him, which obviously all of these people have to do. And Molly, you have a piece in the Wall Street Journal, The Never Surrender President Retreats. And I think there is the question of how much is he internalizing any of this, and does he care?
Well, you do see him backing down on a few fronts recently, right? The way we've seen him handle the tariffs, the on again, off again, the fact that he's paused them in the face of blowback from the markets and from his own party. The way that this week he went back on his seeming threats to want to terminate the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which the markets did not like at all. But even the way he's approaching, things like Doge, the sort of gradual phasing out of that, Elon Musk effort, as Joanna talked about, and on Ukraine now threatening to walk away from these talks entirely. Now, we did see some potential progress with the Zelensky meeting yesterday at Pope Francis's funeral, but these are a lot of different fronts on which you see, a president whose popularity is declining, starting to potentially moderate some of these vast promises that he's made, even as, of course, he is still being maximally confrontational in a lot of different ways. But you saw the student visa issue, right? The administration just completely abandoning that attempt to take away thousands of student visas on Friday. So you see in a lot of places they are backing down to some degree.
Trump versus Zelensky, round 2. President Trump accusing Ukrainian President Zelensky of, quote, inflammatory statements today in a lengthy social media post after Zelensky reiterated he would not concede any territory to Russia, including Crimea, which was annexed in 2014 during the Obama administration. Trump's post came just hours after his vice president, J.D. Vance, said Europe may need to get the deal over the finish line and suggested freezing Ukraine's territorial lines where they are today. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh is in London with new reporting on all this. And Nick, European leaders tell you that President Trump still does very much want a peace deal.
Yeah, certainly a European official I spoke to said that this latest bout of pressure really seems to be about the Trump administration trying to honour its belief it could get a peace deal done in the first 100 days. They've got about a week left, and we've heard in past days Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that they might potentially walk if there wasn't some sort of deal coming forwards. There's supposed to have been today progress in London. The United States Secretary of State Rubio himself, Steve Witkoff, the presidential envoy to Russia and part of this conflict as well, were all supposed to have got together. That meeting significantly downgraded, and lower level officials indeed met. And in fact, after it, and indeed after that Truth Social post by President Trump, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said today was a day in which emotions had run high. And so clearly this issue of the recognition of Crimea as being part of Russia, it's not entirely clear if the US would like to see Ukraine do that. It's a red line. Zelensky said he won't tolerate or contemplate. It's not even allowed by the Ukrainian constitution, or whether this is really the US saying it might recognize Crimea as part of Russia, as part of a concession to get Moscow closer to some kind of deal. It seems to have stirred up tempers and I think increased tension around exactly what can be achieved. In that Truth Social post, what we don't actually know is what is required of Ukraine at this stage. Publicly, that's not been made clear. Trump wants Zelensky to get it done. We just don't know what the it is yet, Jake.
On that Truth Social post from President Trump, he also said, quote, nobody is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, but if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired, unquote. Now, you reported from Ukraine in 2014. Is that what happened?
Yeah, look, just to point out, Zelensky was a TV producer back then, a very different global political climate, and in fact, a bit of a vacuum of power, frankly, in Kiev when little green men that Russia said had nothing to do with it marched into Crimea in 2014. The US, Europe weren't willing to provide arms to get into the fight to assist Ukraine. Ukraine's army was in tatters. And so, yes, frankly, without a shot for the better part of it, in 2014, Russian troops moved in to an area which in the 50s had, under the Soviet Union, been part of Russia and handed over to Ukraine under the Soviet government then. So only recently, in larger history, changed hands. But it was such a different world then, frankly. The West not willing to confront Russia, who they'd had a better relationship with. Massive sanctions against Russia after that particular moment. But it's an exceptionally different world now, we find, with the full-scale invasion of 2022 by Russia of their neighbour. So very different times, hard to compare. Jake.
How do you view the way the administration is handling this?
Look, I think it's fine, Casey, that they want a ceasefire. Everybody should, even if Mr. Putin doesn't. But they've got it wrong, fundamentally wrong in two ways. First, when you go for a ceasefire, you should simply go for a cessation of hostilities. Maybe you have some type of peacekeeping force. But think of the ceasefires that have held over history. The one on the Korean Peninsula, the one in Cyprus. They were simple ceasefires. They didn't try to settle the big so-called final status issues. So that's the first mistake, throwing things like NATO and Crimea into it. Secondly, the things they've thrown into it are totally one-sided. This is a pro-Russian position. Let's just call it out for what it is. So it's wrong methodologically by introducing final status issues up front. And then secondly, it exacerbates that by introducing positions that are very much what Mr. Putin wants to hear on NATO, Crimea, and so forth. Thirdly, it's not explicit, but it worries me. When the vice president and the president talk about walking away, what worries me is not simply they're thinking about walking away from the peace process or negotiations. I worry they're setting Ukraine up to be the fall guy, and they're talking about abandoning not simply negotiations, but abandoning Ukraine. And I think that would be morally and strategically deeply, deeply wrong.
What do you make of the fact that we're learning that Steve Witkoff is going to go back to Moscow? How do you look at his role in all of this and how it plays into kind of that scenario that you laid out of the prospect of America abandoning not just these negotiations, but Ukraine?
Look, all I know is that ever since Mr. Witkoff's been involved and been doing his shuttles to Moscow, the U.S. position is increasingly pretty much the same as the Russian position. And so, again, I'm not privy to those negotiations, obviously. All I can look at is the result and what is said publicly. But so far, at least, I don't see anything constructive that has come from as many hours of sitting face to face with Vladimir Putin.
Where do these talks stand?
Well, just I think 2 minutes ago, President Zelensky responded to President Trump by tweeting that emotions were running high today. I think it was an interesting description of the war of words between him and President Trump. And I think that, Trump and Zelensky are stuck because Trump's plan, which is, more or less what President Putin wants, is very, very far from what President Zelensky is willing to do. And this is why, at the moment, it doesn't seem that there is a deal in the making. We have to also, admit that Zelensky's response wasn't very accurate when it comes to what Trump proposed. Trump did not ask Zelensky to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. He just said that in a peace deal that ends the war, the U.S. will recognize Crimea as part of Russia. Obviously, that's something that the Ukrainians are very much against, but at least the way that Zelensky portrayed it wasn't very accurate.
Certainly not Ukraine recognizing Crimea as part of Russia there. Okay, so talk to us about some of the hangups here, because you have the vice president this morning. He said the deal would freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace. Is there an indication that Vladimir Putin would be placated by freezing those territorial lines close to where they are today?
I think that Putin more or less signaled in his meetings with Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, that he's willing to freeze the war along those lines, as long as the U.S. recognizes Crimea as part of Russia, and as long as the U.S. De facto recognizes that the territory that Putin occupied since the invasion in 2022 will stay part of Russia, even if the U.S. doesn't recognize it officially. So on territory, the U.S. proposal almost matches what Putin wants. But Putin doesn't agree to the other part of Trump's proposal, which is that Ukraine will have a robust security guarantee, that international forces will be positioned inside Ukraine. Those are things that Putin completely rejects. He wants Ukraine to be, demilitarized, without an army, definitely without international forces. So this is why, by the way, Putin still hasn't said yes to this proposal either. Witkoff is going to be again on Friday in Moscow to see Putin, and we'll see if he comes out with a yes from the Russian president. I'm not sure this will be the case.
This push we're hearing about of the Trump administration to get this done in the first 100 days of the president's tenure in the White House. That's according to a European official. That's coming up very quickly next week. I mean, how are you viewing that as a deadline?
Well, we have to remember during the campaign, Trump said he will end the war even during the transition, even before he's being inaugurated. That did not happen. I do not see. We're very close to the 100 days. I think it's like in a week or so, or 2 weeks. It's not a realistic objective. Trump and his team tried very hard in the last 2-3 weeks to get something, which is short of ending the war, just a 30-day ceasefire. They couldn't get that. And I think that this is because Putin feels that in the battlefield, he has the upper hand at the moment. He sees that Zelensky is under a lot of pressure from the US. So Putin is not under any pressure and is not going to accept anything that is short of, his maximalist demands.
Zelensky said he's open to meeting with Trump. They're both going to be in Rome for Pope Francis's funeral, of course. Do you see that happening?
I don't know. I just know one thing. Trump and Zelensky met several times over the last few months. I think the record shows that it might not be a good idea. I mean, we all remember what happened the last time they met in the Oval Office. And I know that people around Zelensky are urging him not to push for such a meeting because the conditions are not ripe and such a meeting could once again explode and create an even bigger crisis. So I don't think that while Zelensky is saying that he wants to meet Trump in Rome, people around Zelensky are urging him not to do it.
Thank you for tuning into the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy, Genesis. All right, with that being said, you guys are the best. Double tap your screen, subscribe to the channel. What is going on between Russia and Ukraine? Hopefully, Trump finds a solution to this because we need that solution. Here we go, Fox News, right? We've done CNN now, time to do Fox, because a lot of people are like, why are you playing CNN alone?
For more on that Trump-Zelensky meeting, let's bring in Fox News contributor and former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman. Dan, thanks for joining us this afternoon. What do you make of that meeting that President Trump, President Zelensky, they had that alone time? There were no aides there. How important was that for the Ukrainians, for Zelensky?
I looked at that almost as a reset. Remember, the last time they met was in that infamous White House meeting, which didn't go the way either side wanted. And so I think this was a good opportunity for them to catch up and reset the relationship.
Now, this is what Senator Kennedy had to say this morning, Republican from Louisiana.
Putin has reneged on every promise that he has made to President Trump. He wants to prohibit Ukraine from joining NATO, and he wants America and Europe to stop helping Ukraine. I think that Putin thinks that America has taken the bullet train to Chumptown.
Senator Lindsey Graham says he's got a sanctions package ready to go. Senator Chuck Grassley says it's time to sanction Putin. Are we seeing a sea change, you think, in the Republican Party when it comes to these talks?
I think we're seeing the beginning of a realization that the first effort that the Trump administration made, which was to entice Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table with the idea that we could offer commercial deals and elimination of sanctions, that didn't work. Putin plowed right through all of those ceasefire discussions and continued to launch artillery strikes at Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian infrastructure. And so I think that the Trump administration and bipartisan consensus in the Congress is that Vladimir Putin can't be enticed to the negotiating table. The question is whether sanctions would do it. Recall that President Biden threatened sanctions when Putin was clearly mobilizing to go to war in January of 2022, and that wasn't enough to deter Putin. Putin has now swiveled his economy to China, where he exports his hydrocarbons and imports dual-use items to keep his war economy afloat. And he's got hydrocarbon exports to India as well. And so I'm not so sure that sanctions would do it. I do think we should be thinking about selling Ukraine the Patriot missiles that they've asked for and continuing to arm Ukraine and provide them with intelligence that they need. That might deliver the right message to Putin that the war isn't tenable anymore and he needs to negotiate.
Because up until then, I mean, you know Russia better than anyone. You know the Putin regime better than anyone. Is there any chance in the world that that regime right now is seriously considering not trying to take over all of Ukraine?
Vladimir Putin's strategic objective from the very beginning was to topple the government of Ukraine. He thought he would do it in 3 days. It was a massive intelligence failure on his part, but on ours as well, because remember, the Biden administration sent President Zelensky a plane, and he famously said, I don't need a flight out of here, I need ammunition. This is where the fight is. So there was a sense of an intelligence failure on both our sides at that time. But Putin hasn't veered from that strategic objective, and even if we strike some sort of a ceasefire deal right now, there's no question that he's going to use that opportunity to rearm and look to strike Ukraine in the future if the opportunity presents itself. That's why Ukraine needs to receive military assistance so that they can deter any future Russian aggression.
And part of this conversation, too, focuses on Crimea. The Russians took it over 11 years ago during the Obama administration. There is some suggestion or some reporting that the United States would recognize Crimea as Russian, even though that's not going to change the conditions on the ground, at least. What impact would that have for the U.S. essentially signing off on that?
That's a bad move. Look, de facto, Russia is in control of Crimea. No one is disputing that. But remember that in 2018, the Trump administration, Secretary of State Pompeo, declared that we would never recognize Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea by force. We don't want to do that de jure. By law, we don't want to do that because then we're sanctioning Russian aggression against their neighbor. And certainly other countries like China would seek to do the same thing against Taiwan. Countries shouldn't be allowed to invade other countries and take their territory. We don't want to recognize that. That would do great harm to the United States' image as a global superpower and run the risk of collateral damage in other parts of the world, especially the Pacific.
Yeah, and finally, just turning very quickly to these negotiations yesterday between the U.S. and Iran. There's going to be another round, according to U.S. officials, sometime soon in Europe. Do you think that the United States can get any productive agreement out of Iran?
Well, Iran is trying to run out the clock a bit here. Look, President Trump delivered that letter to Iran, and there was a 2-month period for negotiations. And we're looking at negotiations every Saturday in Oman. I think that it's good that the technical teams are meeting, but they appear to be pretty far apart, including on the issue of whether Iran is going to be allowed to enrich uranium at all. And we haven't even gotten to the issues of the JCPOA of 2015, sunset clauses, and the issues that JCPOA never addressed, like Iran's ballistic missile program and their support to terrorist proxies in the region and beyond. So this is a very complicated issue, and Iran wants time to rebuild their air defenses that Israel destroyed, as well as rearm their proxy terrorists like Hezbollah and the Houthis. So, look, I'm concerned. Israel would like to launch a strike, but I think we haven't seen any real significant progress, except that both sides are meeting, which is a good thing, but not enough progress, I don't think, that would cause us not to leave that military option off the table. Iran is a nuclear threshold state. That's the legacy of the Biden administration, and the Trump team's going to have to find a solution to that.
All right, Dan Hoffman, thanks so much for joining us.
Live show. Thank you for tuning into the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. Iran wants a nuclear situation, which the United States obviously doesn't want, especially Trump, because if Iran can get their hands on nuclear weapon, then it's almost going to be over. It's absolutely almost going to be over because their first target is most likely going to be the good old USA, isn't it? So, yeah. All right, with these judges and with the situation of them actually protecting illegal migrants on some have been harboring some TDA gang members. So what is going on here? Are they above the law?
No one is above the law.
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 Oh, Hunter Biden is.
Well, remember that? Well, Democrats, they may want to practice what they preach, as two activist liberal judges were arrested this week for allegedly hiding illegal migrants from ICE. Hello, everyone. I'm Anita Vogel, along with Jason Chaffetz, Kevin Cork, and Molly Line. This is a brand new hour of the Big Weekend Show. The Department of Homeland Security is now warning that any activist judges who are thought to be harboring criminals will face the consequences. Assistant DHS Secretary Tricia McLaughlin joined us in the last hour to detail the efforts.
We've seen these activist judges trying to subvert the will of the American people. This is just beyond the pale. We are going to continue to go after these activist judges.
The courts have been going after Trump since his first term, and he's faced more nationwide injunctions than any president in recent history. And now the legal challenges against him, well, they're just piling up. All right, Jason, let me ask you, how is this a winning argument for Democrats?
It's not a winning argument, but it's all they got. The so-called resistance movement is going to take many things. It's going to be crashing these town hall meetings and causing disruptions. It's going to be going out and protesting, yelling and screaming, trying to create this aura that, everything, the place is in chaos. But the judges should know better. And the whole idea, the whole discussion, I hope this country continues to have about these activist judges, these people that take a political position rather than interpreting the law, and sanctuary cities, towns, counties, states. Hey, let's have that discussion in this country, because it ain't right.
It is just astonishing. And, Kevin, you're in the middle of law school. You've got a year under your belt and a couple more to go. I did a semester of law school. You learn about so many cases and precedents that are set. Did you ever learn about a case where a judge intervened in this way?
Not in this particular way, although there are some. I know Molly's like,
go, Kevin, go. Yeah. You first.
If you remember the 1970s, it was this great show. Shaq would do this. Welcome back, Connor. If you're old enough to remember that, I want to hear from you on X.
Oh, and you will.
Yeah, I probably will. I love that you did that. No, but listen, I would just say it this way. Ultimately, we count on the judges, as Jason said, I think adroitly, to observe not just their oath, which is to interpret the law, but to be fair under the law. And ultimately, if you don't recognize the separation of powers, you're not doing your job. And not only that, you're actually hurting the American people. And I think we're seeing more of that since President Trump has gotten back into office than we ever have before. And I think hopefully, and I'm saying hopefully, I'm not holding my breath on this. I'm saying hopefully the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts, will do the right thing and rein this in and not be sort of squishy about this, because ultimately it's his responsibility, Amy Coney Barrett and others as well. You got to do the right thing. Separation of powers is a real thing. The president is the executive. He has the right to do a lot of these things. Make it so.
Yeah, we'll see what they do on this. Molly, I want to ask you about this. Remember, in the last hour, we had the assistant DHS secretary on commenting on all these cases. She talked about this case of a 2-year-old and her mother who were deported. Let's listen to what she had to say about that.
Yes, in regards to the 2-year-old, this is a Honduran illegal immigrant is the mother, and she has 2 children, one of which was born in the U.S. and is a U.S. citizen, and the other which is a foreign-born child as well. And that mother had the option that she wanted to take both children back with her to Honduras. This is very common practice, but I do think it also shows that this administration, we really care about the safety of these children, and we've put together further safeguards such as biometrics testing and DNA to ensure that the children are actually children or relatives of these guardians and parents, because we've seen way too much of drug mules, human traffickers, sex traffickers exploiting these migrant children for their own disgusting gain.
Yeah, so she makes some excellent points there, but there's a lot of pushback on this.
Yeah, well, she's touched on something that the administration has said is one of their top 3 priorities when it comes to enforcement and when it comes to the border, when it comes to immigration, is that matter of ensuring the safety of children. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward, and if we see, like I mentioned before, parents here in America that are left behind, that perhaps that are not deported with their families, trying to bring their children back. It'll be interesting to see those legal cases if this sort of scenario continues to go forward. On the judge's angle, the judge that was taken into custody, it's remarkably similar to a case that happened in Massachusetts in 2018. A Massachusetts judge had allegedly, with ICE in the building in the courthouse, had allegedly allowed the court officer to take an illegal alien and put them out the Sally Port door. She was charged federally, but those charges were ultimately dropped later on, and then she went through a judicial misconduct investigation by the State Judicial Conduct Commission of Massachusetts. But it's happened before. So it'll be interesting to see if there are other judges that see this as valid activism and what comes of this case.
Yeah, well, thank you for that history lesson.
There you go.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. And while some liberals protect illegals here in the U.S., as we're hearing about, a group of Democrats rushed to El Salvador to defend an MS-13 gang member.
If there's not due process for Kilmar, there will be no due process for anyone. And we are here fighting for the future of our democracy.
This is not just a threat to all people in the United States. This is what we all have been calling a constitutional crisis.
Kilmar needs to come home. We need to build support here in El Salvador, but also in the United States.
We have to make a big deal about this. Members of Congress have to come here.
Democrat Senator Chris Van Hollen already grabbed a drink with Kilmar Abrego Garcia last week, ignoring his MS-13 ties, which is a change of tune from a 2017 social media post by Van Hollen, where he wanted the U.S. to target MS-13. But now Van Hollen is rushing to their defense, calling for Americans to boycott El Salvador over Abrego Garcia. Listen.
We can put pressure on the government of El Salvador. El Salvador is trying to strengthen its economy. Vote with your feet. There are lots of places to visit in Central America. Costa Rica is a beautiful place. You don't have to go to El Salvador.
But some on the far left think this obsession with the criminal gang member is hurting the party.
We've been talking about strong border security for so many years. When you're talking about bringing somebody, and I know there was due process questions from that was in Maryland and now in Salvador. I don't know if that's the right issue that Democrats should be focusing right now.
He is likely a gangbanger. I don't understand why you just don't argue the law instead of kind of making a George Floyd play with this guy like he's some kind of patron saint.
At least 11 Americans were killed by illegal gang members under the Biden administration, including these 4 innocent Americans who were brutally slain by undocumented MS-13 and Tren de Aragua members. You know, Jason, this effort by Senator Van Hollen seems sort of outrageous. You know, he's gone down there to meet with him and, you know, to sort of defended this whole situation. Now he's calling for a boycott of El Salvador. I thought you were elected to Congress to represent the U.S. citizen.
Oh, this is where the Democratic Party is today. They're going to go to the mat. They will go to other countries to fight to get gang-banging people back into this country instead of the victims and the innocents. And you know what? How about the people who come here legally and lawfully? Exactly. We underserve them. We don't take care of them. They make all this, oh, we got to take care of the rule of law and all that. Well, the rule of law, if you want to claim asylum, is to come in through the front door. You actually have to go to a port of entry and make that claim, not be coming in by the millions. So it's all one-sided with them. It's always, it just appears as if every single time they're fighting for the criminal element instead of Americans and the people who come here legally and lawfully. And that's what's so disgusting about their efforts.
You know, his wife filed reports saying that she was abused by him. Anybody jump in on this one? Where are the women's rights groups saying believe all women and defending women who have been victims of domestic violence?
Molly? Yeah, the thing that stood out to me when we talk about El Salvador, he's saying don't travel there. The United States has changed their travel designation. It is now safer there than it had been previously under this President Bukele, who came to the White House. He was reelected in a landslide. And the prisons that they're talking about down there, he says this is the reason why. Now, there are human rights groups that argue that there are too many people being swept up and put into these prisons. But the point that this president, El Salvador's President Bukele, was making at the White House is that he took a country that had been the murder capital of that area, of that part of the hemisphere of the world, and turned it into a safe place. And now our State Department says it's safer to travel there. So it's been fascinating to see that aspect of this as well.
Yeah, it is bizarre.
Yeah.
And while Democrats try to bring gang members back to the U.S., the FBI is warning that members of the Venezuelan government are using Tren de Aragua to undermine public safety in the U.S., saying that TDA could be used to threaten or kill anyone critical of the Maduro regime. This is not the first time a foreign enemy has attempted to send their worst to the U.S. We witnessed a similar situation during the 1980 Mariel boat lift when Fidel Castro released his prisoners into South Florida.
For Fidel Castro, it was tantamount to an act of genocide. With one fell swoop, he rid Cuba of thousands and thousands of undesirables. He emptied his prisons. He cleared the bums off the streets of Havana. Murderers, thieves, perverts, prostitutes, all were rounded up, sent to Mariel Harbor, and put aboard boats bound for Miami.
Okay. I love the old news clip there.
Yeah.
But, Kevin, if this is true and Venezuela is sending these people here to, do all kinds of nefarious things, I mean, would you consider this an act of war?
I wouldn't consider it an act of war. I would consider it an act of statescraft. Understand that if you go anywhere around the globe, they have their own version of the Secret Service. They have their own version of the CIA. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were some folks in the intelligence agencies in these respective countries that do want to get their people here, especially, Jason mentioned it, 10 million people just sort of pour over the border. We have no idea who's here. We could have sleeper cells here. We could have agents here. We simply don't know. They give a fake ID, a fake name. Who knows who's in the country? I'm not surprised that this has happened. I'm just surprised that more people aren't calling this out. And I guarantee you, it's not just them. It's probably a number of other countries as well.
Well, Jason, people scoffed at President Trump when he said other countries are not sending their best. But it seems that he may have been onto something.
Yeah. Well, back when I was in Congress years ago, I went to one of the detention facilities in Arizona. And one of the things that strikes you when you go there is there are people represented from more than 150 countries.
Yeah.
It's not just Mexico or El Salvador. People, I think, have a tendency to think, oh, this is about Central South America. No, we're talking about tens of thousands of Chinese nationals.
Yeah.
Why are they being sent here?
Correct.
People coming from all over the world that are making their way here. And don't think that they're all just coming to, pick vegetables or do something. A lot of them have some very nefarious intent. And we better get a grip on that because those people need to be targeted and expelled as well. Not just the criminal element,
Exactly.
People who are doing the intellectual, trying to get at our intellectual property, people that are spying on America, those two also need to be prosecuted, and they need to be targeted, and they need to be expelled.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. Molly, real quick, is the mainstream media going to report on any of this? Real quick.
I believe that they'll have their take, I guess. It would be real quick.
All right, we will see. Well, coming up.
That's tricky because when you say people stealing intellectual property, that's tricky because how do you figure that out? It's sort of tricky. Well, China, we know they steal intellectual property of Americans for sure. Tell you that much.
Executive producer of CBS News 60 Minutes, Bill Owens, resigned today. Now, normally that would probably not be news that we would bring you, except the circumstances rise to the level of, well, alarm.
Okay, here we go. So because of Trump, that's why he resigned. Jake, shout out to Jake. He's about to say what I expect him to say.
Owens said in a letter to his staff that, quote, over the past months, it has become clear that I would not be allowed to run the show as I have always run it, to make independent decisions based on what was right for 60 Minutes, right for the audience, unquote. And the context here is key because President Trump has been suing CBS News and its parent company, Paramount Global, for $20 billion for what the president calls, quote, unlawful and illegal behavior, unquote, though his accusations, according to legal experts, do not withstand scrutiny. This is what happened. Last fall, 60 Minutes interviewed Vice President Harris. President Trump declined the show's offer to sit down with them for an interview. During the Harris interview, 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker asked the then sitting vice president why Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was not apparently listening to the Biden administration. Now, a preview of her answer ran in a preview clip on CBS's Face the Nation on Sunday morning.
The work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
The next day, however, 60 Minutes ran this answer when it ran the actual edited interview.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
Now, CBS News explained the discrepancy, saying that...
So you changed the answer. During an election, you're changing answers during elections, and that's not election interference? Yeah, I don't think so.
That they merely ran two different parts from the same longer answer, and under pressure they revealed their transcript, and that is indeed what they did, as frankly happens all the time, including with President Trump's taped interviews. For instance, just for instance, in June of 2024, this ran on Fox.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
Definitive, firm, yes, I would. But, as Semaphore noted at the time, the full, unedited version featured Trump sounding far less definitive.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony.
What is the difference? We say, yes, I would, and then something else, right? He sort of kind of like supported his answer with whatever he's saying right now. But when you check Kamala's answer, it was totally different. Jake?
Stuff with that whole world.
The president alleges that editing the 60 Minutes interview and running two different answers to the same question helped Vice President Harris and amounted to electoral fraud. In reality, this is just editorial discretion. Editors do it all the time with recorded interviews, including all the time with taped interviews and Donald Trump by Fox. All the time. And legal experts, left, right, and center, say that this lawsuit in a court would certainly fail spectacularly. But Paramount Global...
Exactly. But Trump has the judges in his pocket. Let's go, Jake.
Which owns CBS News, is currently trying to merge with Skydance Media. And in order to do so, they need the approval of the Trump administration, specifically the FCC. And under the FCC's brand new Trump-supporting commissioner, Brendan Carr, it has been suggested that Trump's news distortion allegations against 60 Minutes will be considered by the FCC before any merger is approved. Now, Sherry Redstone is the majority owner of Paramount, and she stands to make a fortune if this multi-billion-dollar deal, this merger goes through. And it seems as if Sherry Redstone is likely to bend the knee to Trump and settle this allegedly frivolous lawsuit. Now, Bill Owens, until today the head of 60 Minutes, rightly believes that 60 Minutes has nothing to apologize for. And that's what's going on. That's the context. One 60 Minutes source tells me, quote, the lawsuit was baseless. He wouldn't apologize, meaning Bill. Bill Owens wouldn't bend. He fought for the broadcast and for independent journalism, and that cost him his job. It's shameful, unquote. A second 60 Minutes source tells me, quote, Bill has widespread support at 60. He's dedicated his life to CBS and the broadcast, and this was his last act of dedication to it. It's like a guy who has been battling for months against an attack, unable to defend the broadcast from inappropriate corporate influence. He pulls the pin from his last grenade. He sacrificed himself, hoping it might make our corporate overlords wake up and realize they risk destroying what makes 60 Minutes great. It seems clear now, in a quest to sell the company, Sherry Redstone and others will bow to presidential pressure. 60 Minutes is one of the crown jewels of American broadcast journalism, and they have no problem crushing it in their race to make a deal and make themselves richer, unquote. Sherry Redstone had no comment when we reached out. President Trump, of course, has been trying to kneecap anyone providing oversight over his administration. He literally started his administration by firing a whole bunch of inspectors general. He is currently ignoring judges and courts. He and his MAGA forces intimidate the legislative branch from uttering even a peep of criticism. They're going after law firms. They're going after universities. And this war against the Fourth Estate journalists is of this piece. Owens is not without his critics, of course, but this is not about one man or even about one show. It's about an attempt to be rid of criticism. The Pentagon has taken the offices of CNN and NBC and the New York Times and Politico and reassigned them to outlets that provide more flattering coverage, like Breitbart. The White House is doing the same with wire services, its war against the Associated Press, and bringing in folks like this one from last Friday.
Photos have emerged of Senator Van Hollen sipping what appears to be margaritas with Abrego Garcia down in El Salvador. Do you encourage other Democrats to fly down to El Salvador to meet with this illegal alien who's an accused wife beater?
I like this guy. See, now this is.
I like this guy,
is the
yes.
kind of a reporter we like. There aren't enough of them.
That person, of course, that was asking that question was asking about a lie. Senator Chris Van Hollen says that those margaritas were never touched. They were set up on the table.
Of course, they were
by
never
somebody
touched.
working for the president of El Salvador. To
Of course, they were never touched. Okay, they were just on the table.
make a joke of this senator's meeting. Those margarita glasses were propaganda, and that's what that person asked about. And of course, that's the kind of reporter that the president likes, because that question was not the question of a reporter. And that is the context of Sherry Redstone's likely bending of the knee. Hope the money's worth it, Sherry.
Joining us now for more perspective is Brian Steinberg.
The money's
senior
worth it,
TV editor
Sherry.
for Variety.
Of course, the money's worth it, Jake. There we go.
Chinese government speaking directly to Outfront today after Trump issued this warning to China today about his tariff war.
I'm not going to drop them unless they give us something that's, substantial. Otherwise, I'm not going to drop them.
All right, the spokesman for the Chinese embassy had a long conversation with Outfront today and said, quote, since the U.S. initiated these unilateral tariffs, if it sincerely wishes to resolve the issues, it must completely abolish all unilateral tariffs on China. All unilateral tariffs. That's not just coming down half or three, that's all. He then went on to say, and I quote again, China and the U.S. are not having any consultation or negotiation on tariffs. The U.S. should stop creating confusion. Dan Ives and Peter Tuchman are here. And Dan, look, the embassy spokesman there, very clear. They said no consultations or negotiations are going on right now. Now, Trump obviously has very directly said otherwise. So what is all of this doing?
Look, and Peter and I have talked about it's creating mass confusion in the market because at the end of the day, everyone wants to understand when deals actually get done and when real talks are getting done. And we've talked about it, is that time's ticking. You have, 2.5 weeks in terms of when we're actually going to see the shortages. Yeah, by your math,
we're getting up
about
close to
2.5 weeks till the shortages, till the price increases. And it comes down to talk's cheap. The market at this point, and Peter will talk about it, market's up because you're anticipating now, backs against wall, you got to get deals done. But time's ticking. You got to get deals done, I believe, starting this weekend.
So, Peter, the Time Magazine interview, Trump gave the impression he had talked to Xi. Right. I mean, it was very clear. He wanted everyone to think he had talked to Xi about the tariffs. But the way he said it was, Time said, will you call President Xi if he doesn't call you? Trump, no. Time, you won't? Trump, nope. Time, has he called you yet? Yep. When did he call you? He's called. And I don't think that's a sign of weakness on his behalf. Okay, he's called. And then pressed by CNN on when, did you talk to him since the tariffs? Did you talk to him 2 years ago? When did you talk to him? Trump said this.
I don't want to comment on that, but I've spoken to him many times.
Okay, so that was clearly not talking to him about the tariffs right now. So, what are the impact of these games?
It's baffling to me. I've been trying to be the cup half full person in the room for the last bunch of days with you guys, and it's getting to the point where it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, it's even though the market is up 4 days in a row, and that could be just smart investors knowing that some deal has to be on the table and has to be made because the alternative is really dark. Right, it's what Dan calls, this is it's supply chain Armageddon, right? And so that's not really an alternative that we can handle. But it just doesn't make sense. Why? I don't understand the game that they're playing. It makes absolutely no sense. If they were talking, they would say they were talking. That would show some kind of positivity. One of them or both would. I mean, what a great thing that would be if the two of them actually, said we are talking in this. Why are we playing that game? Where, look, it's not going to affect me on a day-to-day basis. There are people's lives who are being impacted hugely.
Yes.
Right, maybe not us, but there are millions of people who voted for Mr. Trump, right, across the country who literally may have wanted to retire at the end of this year, who are living paycheck to paycheck, who may have had a small 401k or something, some
201k,
or which is now a 201k. I don't get that. It's disrespectful at best.
I think to his point, I think that the big issue here is that who do you believe? In terms of so now something comes out 2 hours later, and then there's another message. Market at this point, they're giving benefit of the doubt. That's why stocks are up this week. But going into next week, you need deals.
Yeah. And of course, as you point out, I mean, you don't want to be in a position where you're saying, well, nobody trusts China, so we can be as untrustworthy as China on our word of what we say is happening. It's not the U.S. way.
And then you're playing poker with yourself, too.
Right. And that's what he's done so far. Okay. I want on the whiteboard. This is something you pointed out. Okay. It's something called blank shipping, right? All right. Blank shipping. So I'm just going to draw a container ship. Blank sailing. I'm not going to put a sail on it because it's a big cargo ship, but you got a big cargo ship here. Okay, usually it's full of cargo on the top. Beginning of the year, these ships leaving Asia, 0% of them were skipping ports. They were going to every port. They were picking up what they had. Containers were full.
100%.
Okay, now 40%. These are the numbers you're pointing to, Dan. As many as 40% of these ships. Guess what? Okay, this is May's schedule. Bypassing ports. So
inventory is down 40%.
And ships have to go when they have to go. You can't just sit around and wait. So they're going with just a few containers on them. These half-empty, who knows what, from 0% to 40%.
And just think about what it's going to look like over the next week, 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And that's why deals need to get done, because this is what business leaders from e-commerce, across every industry are basically saying, like, time's ticking, and guess what's going to happen? Shortages, massive price increases, and that's where, look, we just talked about, for the U.S. consumer hasn't seen it yet.
No.
It's come, look, remember, it goes back to, it's like being on a beach, and all of a sudden, like, you're in the ocean, there's no water. You're like, oh, this is crazy.
I'm going to run out and check it out.
I'm going to run out. You're like, no, it's because the tsunami's coming. So the point is that the reality is that he needs to get deals done.
But because this question, Peter, that I'm trying to understand. With China, a deal doesn't just happen with a snap and a finger and a go. No. I mean, at least there would be nothing to indicate that that's how it's going to happen. But we're in a situation where if you look at the ships and you look at what's happening, right, that can be a blip. Only if you have an immediate sudden change afterwards.
The logistics of I'm working with a guy named Andrew Sopko who runs a company called Batch. We've talked about how AI is coming into the logistics space around trucking in the United States, and how complicated that is, and how important it is that every little check. The trucks have to be full. They have to be on time. All of that works. Think about it. When you're only going at 40% inventory, that's going to start. So the ship lines are going to be losing money. Everybody is going to start losing money.
You don't get your inventory, then I don't get mine. They don't get theirs.
Then if it opens up back up, those are all late.
And then you even talk about, you're talking about even like Christmas. The point is the supply. That's what we're dealing with.
And the retailers of small businesses, and we talk about the stuffed animal company, they're saying they put in their order for 80% of their sales, Christmas, by the end of May.
Correct.
So that's normal.
That is the lead time for this thing. And that's the lead time that's going to start affecting when it starts affecting food and all kinds of other, look, you saw that with Target and Walmart. Actually, the CEOs of a lot of the retailers went to the White House apparently to talk and say, this is real for us.
And how do you price it? Because you don't know what you're pricing. And you've talked about that.
Huge uncertainty. Well, here we are, another weekend, and again, the market hoping, right? Because the market's saying, got to be a deal because the alternative is so horrific it can't contemplate.
Correct. And that, look, the market felt strong. It was there was the advances versus declines were good. The buy side felt like it was buying with intent. So there are buyers in the wings, right? And somebody that must be smart money thinking that a deal has to be made because the alternative is really ugly.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you for tuning into the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. Shout out to the moderators and shout out to the members of the channel. Shout out to Luke. Thank you for being a member of the channel. Thank you for your super chat. And shout out to Mr. Busky. Shout out to Zyra's Garden. Shout out to Sandra. Shout out to See Shelly for sure. Everybody who's tuned in and everybody watching right now, God bless you. I support Trump. I don't expect him to be a saint, okay? I don't think he's going to get everything right. However, he's definitely one of the only ones who can actually do what is needed to be done, okay? Most people are complaining about the tariffs. Would you say that the United States has a fair trade deal with China? No, of course not. Even other countries. Okay? But nobody has the balls to do it. Now we have someone who actually has the balls to do it, but nobody actually supports. I don't understand this, man. You had a president who was falling off stairs, falling off stages, walking into the Amazon rainforest, sleeping on the world stage, and then you don't want to support someone who's doing 2 to 4 events every single work week since he was inaugurated. I don't understand, man.
Into the Wisconsin judge's arrest is the House Freedom Caucus chair, Maryland Congressman Andy Harris. Congressman Harris, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Do you think the FBI was right to arrest this judge?
They were 100% correct. The federal law is very clear. No official can interfere with the enforcement of federal immigration law. It's in the U.S. Code. This judge knew full well it's in the U.S. Code and should take responsibility for her actions.
What kind of consequences do you think she should face? Should she be a judge anymore? Do you think that she should face fines, jail time?
No, she absolutely shouldn't be a judge. The bottom line is she aided and abetted a criminal. And became a criminal herself by aiding and abetting that criminal. So again, she should be removed from the bench, and that probably should be the punishment that every judge should get if they do the same thing.
There's an argument there that when you talk about courthouses and apprehending illegal immigrants from courthouses, you deter them from showing up to their own criminal cases, you deter them from testifying in criminal cases against other people. Do you think that courthouses should tread a little differently than other places in the country?
Well, clearly, the reason why ICE has to come to courthouses sometimes is because the prisons don't cooperate with ICE and local sheriffs, local jurisdictions. Look, they have to catch these illegal immigrant criminals wherever they are. If they're in a courthouse, it's in a courthouse. Wherever they are, they should capture them and send them back home.
One of the major initiatives also in the president's first 100 days are all of these tariffs and trade negotiations. Here's what the Treasury Secretary had to say about that.
We have a process in place over the next 90 days to negotiate with them. Some of those are moving along very well. Nobody's better at creating this leverage than President Trump. He's shown the high tariffs, and here's the stick. This is where the tariffs can go, and the carrot is come to us, take off your tariffs, take off your non-tariff trade barriers.
I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks since these negotiations have been ongoing, but still we don't have any trade deals announced yet. There are a lot of countries on this list. How much time do you think the president has to start completing some of these deals?
Well, we've certainly seen some changes from the foreign countries. We've had trillions of dollars of investments promised into the United States, bringing jobs back home, tens of billions of dollars in the pharmaceutical industry alone, which has, again, left the country to a large extent over the past few decades. This president is bringing those jobs back. And I think the reason is because of the threat of tariffs.
You look at some of this recent Fox News polling that we have out on this when it comes to the economy and jobs. There's some skepticism out there that the tariffs will help the economy. 32% say help, 55% say they will hurt the economy. Jobs at 36%, hurt at 44%. Do you think that the American people have the patience to watch this happen? And if people are losing their jobs, or there are issues with manufacturers who aren't getting inputs from across from countries around the world, could this snowball?
I don't think so. I think what's significant to note is that, yes, some people are losing jobs, but the unemployment rate is basically unchanged. The fact of the matter is this economy is changing. The president is bringing jobs back into the United States, again, getting trillions of dollars of investment from overseas companies to build their stuff here. And that's really, really important for America.
How much of the mix do you think should be not just building items here, but moving manufacturing out of China? Maybe not some of the less higher tech manufacturing to different countries that we're more aligned with or allied with, or as opposed to just bringing all that manufacturing back to the U.S.?
Well, we should bring as much as possible back to the U.S., but if we can't bring it to the U.S., we should bring it to allied countries so that, again, God forbid we have another war or conflict, we're not at the beck and call of China.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that there is a way that the United States can work with our allies to do that, and do these trade negotiations hamper or help that process?
Look, I think they help the process. I think the United States is still the largest economy in the world. It's very important to be a trade partner of the United States. And if part of that deal is either bringing jobs here or not sending some jobs to China, in the case of some of our trade partners, both of those are valuable in the long run.
All right. Congressman Andy Harris, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. We have been streaming for 3 hours. And you guys are the best as usual. Instead of looking for perfection, seek for consistency. Never give up on yourself. Never give up on your dreams. Never give up on God. Believe in yourself. Believe in your dreams. And believe in Almighty God. With that being said, I want to say thank you to the veterans. Thank you to the military personnel. Thank you to the military personnel. You guys protect the homeland. God bless you. And God bless America. God bless the president. And may God protect our troops. Okay? Thank you so much. It is Sunday evening. Go outside. Have a good time with your family. Fathers, take care of your kids. I know life is hard, but take care of your kids. Okay? Fathers, take care of your sons and your daughters, okay? Take responsibility. All right. With that being said, I am signing out. All right. Love you guys. Thank you one more time.